Hi guys, and welcome to Quiet Voice Podcast channel. Tonight we are drifting into a Louisiana swamp camp, where darkness does not merely fall, but settles upon the water like a warm, breathing blanket. You sit low in a narrow wooden pirogue, your fingers damp against the paddle, while cypress trunks rise around you like pillars in a flooded cathedral. What would frighten you first? The quiet splash beside the boat, the invisible wings whining near your ears, or the thought that your bed tonight stands above black water and soft mud. The air smells of wet bark, old smoke, and green things slowly sinking into themselves. A lantern glows ahead, weak and yellow, marking a camp too small to feel reassuring. Somewhere in the reeds, something moves with patient confidence. You're not invited here by comfort. You're invited by curiosity. So as said, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and gently tell us in the comments where you're listening from and what your local time is tonight. Now, dim the lights and let the paddle blades slip quietly from the water. Your small boat glides forward almost soundlessly, except for the soft drip falling from its worn wooden edge. On ordinary ground, arriving somewhere means stepping down onto something firm and sensible. Here, the swamp has removed that little luxury. Beneath you lies water stained the colour of strong tea, darkened by fallen leaves and slow decay. Beneath that water waits silt, tangled roots, broken branches, and mud determined to keep whatever enters it. The man guiding your pirogue says very little. Perhaps he's learned that words travel strangely across water at night. His shoulders move in a calm rhythm, dipping the paddle beside floating duckweed and patches of broad green leaves. He wears a faded shirt that seems permanently damp and a hat whose brim bends like tired grass. Nothing about him suggests panic. This is reassuring, although only slightly. You are dressed badly for the evening. Your collar already clings to your neck and moisture gathers beneath your sleeves. The warmth is not the pleasant warmth of a blanket. It presses against you from every direction, carrying the smell of standing water, crushed plants, fish scales, wood smoke, and something rich and earthy that you cannot quite name. Louisiana wetlands have supported people for generations through fishing, trapping, hunting, gathering, and travel by small boats. Long before motors disturbed these waterways, a pirogue could move through shallow passages where heavier craft became useless. Its narrow body made it practical among roots, grasses, and flooded timber. Practical does not mean comfortable. Your knees know this already. A low shape appears ahead, lifted slightly above the water. At first, it resembles a heap of timber caught among trees. Then the lantern light catches a roofline, a short landing platform, and a crooked wall made from rough boards. This is your camp. It does not rest upon a proud foundation of brick or stone. It stands on posts, raised above water and mud, as though cautiously attempting not to become part of the swamp itself. There it is, your refuge. The pirogue bumps gently against the landing, and the sound seems loud enough to disturb the entire wetland. You reach for a post, then hesitate. Its surface is slick beneath your fingertips, coated with moisture and a faint velvet of growth. You try again, carefully this time, steadying yourself while the boat gives a small, unpleasant wobble. Getting out requires a kind of faith. One foot leaves the boat and finds a narrow plank. The plank flexes. Your other foot follows, and the pirogue shifts away with a scraping murmur. For one foolish second, you imagine yourself stepping neatly into darkness, sinking to the knee, perhaps deeper, while your calm guide watches you become a cautionary tale. You do not fall, a fine achievement. The platform is barely wide enough for comfort, and the boards have been polished unevenly by boots, rain, fish baskets, and damp seasons. Along the edge hangs a coil of a rope, a stained net, and a tin bucket that gives off a distinct smell of yesterday's catch. Small moths throw themselves repeatedly against the lantern chimney, each making a delicate tapping noise. Their determination is admirable. Their judgment is less impressive. Around the camp, bald cypress trees rise from the water, their broad bases flaring outward near the surface. Strange pointed shapes protrude nearby, looking like wooden stumps arranged by someone with a taste for inconvenience. These are cypress knees, upward-growing structures connected to the roots. Their exact functions have inspired debate among botanists, with theories involving stability, gas exchange, and the complicated needs of trees living in wet soil. Tonight, however, they mainly appear designed to trip you. Your host lifts a cloth sack from the pirogue, then gestures toward the doorway. The gesture says that standing outside, wondering about trees, is an activity best enjoyed during daylight. You duck through the opening and find yourself in a room that is smaller, darker, and more alive than expected. The floorboards complain softly under your weight. The walls hold fishing lines, patched clothing, a battered cooking pot, and a few tools with handles polished by long use. Near one corner stands a narrow bunk covered by a rolled blanket and a folded length of netting. A second bunk appears to have been assembled from hope, old lumber and nails driven at unusual angles. On a crate sits an oil lamp, its flame-shaping shadows across the boards. The room smells of soot, damp cloth, stale tobacco, dried fish, and wood that has absorbed years of rain. The odour is not exactly pleasant, yet it carries a kind of honesty. Nothing here pretends to be clean, dry, or easy. You hear a faint scratching sound near the wall. Your guide does not turn his head. This seems unfair. He sets down the sack and begins checking the window openings. They have no glass, only wooden shutters and scraps of thin mesh. Air must pass through the camp, because without it the heat would thicken into misery. Unfortunately, anything with wings understands this principle very well. The evening has barely deepened, and already delicate visitors are beginning to circle your face. One lands on your wrist. You brush it away. Another finds your cheek. The mosquito is not the swamp's largest resident, nor its most dramatic. It is simply among the most persistent. For people living and working in the southern wetlands, insects were not a minor irritation added to an adventurous life. They could shape sleeping arrangements, camp placement, clothing choices, smoke fires, and health itself. Malaria and yellow fever became feared realities in Louisiana history, though yellow fever was especially connected with towns and ports where infected mosquitoes found dense populations. Out here, alone with the humming air, historical distinctions offer limited comfort. Your guide unfolds the netting above the bunk. It is called a mosquito bar, a plain name for an object suddenly appearing more precious than silk in camps, cabins, and homes across warm regions. Protective netting could mean the difference between troubled sleep and a night spent slapping your own skin in growing despair. The fabric hangs like a pale veil, thin enough to show the bunk within, strong enough to suggest a fragile boundary between you and the appetite outside. Fragile is the important word. You lay your small bundle beside the bunk, trying not to stare at a dark mark moving along the wall. It disappears behind a hanging shirt. You decide that it was a harmless beetle. The decision is unsupported but emotionally useful. Outside, the final light withdraws from the water. Evening does not vanish evenly in the swamp. It gathers under branches, beneath platforms, behind tree trunks, and inside curtains of trailing grey plant growth. Spanish moss sways overhead, although it is not actually a moss at all, but a flowering plant related to bromeliads. It hangs from limbs in soft drapes, catching humidity and moonlight, giving the trees the weary appearance of old storytellers. A faint breeze lifts it now. The breeze does not reach you. You step back onto the platform while your host prepares the lantern for fuller darkness. From here, the camp seems surrounded by endless corridors of water. The pathway you used has already disappeared among shadows and reflections. Cypress trunks double themselves in the surface, creating false openings and false walls. A patch of clear water resembles a route home until a cluster of reeds gently drifts across it. The swamp rearranges itself without moving. From somewhere far off comes the splash of a fish breaking the surface. Then another. A bird calls once, sharply, as though voicing an objection, and receives no reply. Tree frogs begin their steady evening chorus, followed by insects whose pulsing rhythm seems to rise from the water itself. The sounds overlap, separate, and overlap again, surrounding the little camp with a living curtain. You expected silence. Instead, you receive an orchestra with no conductor and no interval. Your guide returns carrying 2 pieces of split wood and a handful of dry kindling protected beneath an overturned tin. Keeping anything dry here requires planning bordering upon devotion. He kneels beside a small iron stove set near the open side of the shelter, where smoke can escape more easily. His match flares briefly, bright against the growing darkness, and the kindling accepts the flame with a crackle that feels unexpectedly friendly. Smoke rises, pale and sharp. It catches in your throat, then slides outward through the opening, almost at once. Several mosquitoes alter their routes. The fire is not merely for food or comfort. Smoke is defense, imperfect but welcome, against creatures that seem to regard exposed skin as a formal invitation. You move closer to it, even though the warmth is entirely unnecessary. Near the stove rests a chipped enamel cup, a small pan, and a knife worn narrow from sharpening. Nothing has been chosen for beauty. Everything earns its place through usefulness. A swamp camp cannot afford objects that only admire themselves. Even the bucket near the doorway has several duties, none of which you wish to investigate too closely. The guide pours a little water into the cup, then pauses and smells it. He gives you a look that suggests drinking straight from whatever surrounds you would be unwise. Clear water can conceal unpleasant company, especially where animals, mud, heat, and human activity meet. The liquid for tonight has been brought in a covered container, a quiet reminder that the swamp may surround your body while refusing to satisfy your thirst safely. Your mouth feels drier after learning this. As the fire strengthens, its light reaches the nearest trunks. Beyond them, darkness thickens into a single wall. There are no distant house windows, no street lamps, no friendly outline of a road. You begin to understand how complete isolation can feel when water replaces pathways. A few minutes by boat may separate you from another person. In darkness, with no familiar route, those minutes expand strangely. People who stayed in wetland camps were often there because work demanded it. Trappers followed animals and waterways. Fishers needed access to their grounds. Hunters watched seasons and movement. Timber crews pushed into cypress country when valuable wood drew commercial attention. The romantic image of a lonely cabin under trees becomes less romantic when your shirt never dries. Your bed requires netting, and every tool rusts unless cared for. Still, there is a quiet beauty here, annoyingly so. The fire glances across the water in ripples of copper. A frog leaps from the platform with a tiny plop. Somewhere overhead, wings beat slowly through the branches. The smell of smoke settles into your clothing, mixing with damp wood and the mineral odour of water. You run your hand along the rough plank rail, feeling splinters, grooves, and old repairs beneath your palm. This place has survived many evenings. You are trying to survive one. A strange little object hangs near the doorway, a dried alligator foot attached to a cord, curled as though still gripping invisible mud. Such charms have appeared in regional trade and tourist culture, sometimes sold as curiosities, sometimes treated as lucky keepsakes. Your guide notices your attention and merely shrugs. Perhaps it is for luck. Perhaps someone once found it amusing. In the swamp, a joke and a warning may occupy the same hook. Historians still argue whether popular images of remote swamp life preserve genuine camp customs or reshape them through later tourism, storytelling, and the appetite for mystery. Real working camps could be harsh, practical places, yet tales attach themselves easily to water, darkness, and isolation. It is difficult to blame the storytellers. The landscape seems prepared to assist them. A low sound rolls across the water. It is not loud, but it is deep enough to settle in your chest. You turn toward the black surface, trying to identify its source. Your guide adds another piece of wood to the fire with no visible concern. The sound comes again, a distant bellow from an alligator announcing itself somewhere beyond the lantern's reach. You tell yourself that distance is comforting. The lantern flickers as a warm gust enters the camp. Shadows lift across the walls, transforming tools into fingers and hanging nets into slumped figures. The mosquito bar stirs above your bunk. Its edges move gently, opening and closing like a curtain awaiting a performer who has lost interest in appearing brave. You sit on the edge of the bunk. The wood creaks beneath you, while the netting brushes your shoulder with the softness of an uneasy promise. Outside, the frogs, insects, fish, birds, and hidden reptiles continue their nightly arrangements. None of them appear concerned about your comfort. None of them even recognize your arrival as important. That may be the most unsettling part. You're not facing a wilderness waiting to attack you. You're sitting within a world already busy, already balanced, already at home. The camp is only a small wooden interruption raised above its dark floor. The lantern creates a circle of safety, but the circle is modest, trembling, and temporary. Your guide places a pot near the fire and begins preparing the evening meal without ceremony. You watch the water beyond him, where a single ripple travels between reflected branches and dissolves beneath the platform. Something made it. Something has gone on its way. Night now fills every open space. Your first hour in the swamp camp has hardly begun, and your skin already itches, your clothing already clings, and your ears already strain toward every unfamiliar sound. Yet the fire gives a steady crackle. The lantern holds its small amber glow, and the rough boards remain beneath your feet. For the moment, that is enough. The shelter begins to reveal its true character when you try to make yourself comfortable. From the water, it looked like a cabin, plain but dependable, a dry wooden promise balanced among trees. From inside, it feels more like a complicated agreement between human stubbornness and a landscape determined to soften, soak, and swallow everything placed within reach. You press your boot against one floorboard, testing it without meaning to. It answers with a low groan, dipping slightly under your weight. Another board beside it bears a dark stain where moisture has crept along the grain. Small patches of mud have dried near the doorway, shaped by boots that understood where to step and where never to place full confidence. The floor is raised upon posts driven deep into unstable earth. That simple decision separates your sleeping place from mud, shallow flooding, crawling creatures, and the steady dampness beneath. Throughout the low wetlands of Louisiana, buildings and working camps often depended upon elevation, where water could rise without invitation. Lifting a floor was not decorative wisdom, it was survival made visible. Still, the posts are not stone pillars. They lean with age, settling into silt and shifting soil. Each seems to have accepted a slightly different opinion about standing straight. A length of timber braces one corner, nailed across the frame at an angle. The repair looks crude, although the shelter remains upright. You begin to admire any repair that succeeds without elegance. Rain has tested this place repeatedly. You see its record overhead, written in patches of tin, weathered boards, and strips of tarred cloth pressed into narrow gaps. The roof slopes steeply enough to shed heavy water, directing it away from the fragile walls. Some sections are newer than others, bright in spots where dull metal has not yet surrendered to rust. You reach upward, touching a roof beam with your fingertips. The wood feels rough, dry on one side, faintly damp near a joint. A brown droplet gathers slowly along a nail, quivering in the lantern glow. It does not fall. Not yet. You find yourself watching it with the personal attention usually reserved for a suspicious insect or a poker player. Nothing here becomes fully dry. The swamp air presses through every opening, warm and heavy with moisture. Shirts hung from wooden pegs remain soft and clammy. A blanket folded at the end of your bunk gives beneath your fingers, not wet enough to complain about, yet not dry enough to welcome you. It carries the smell of smoke, human sleep, old rain, and wool that has endured more than it deserved. Your host pulls a rolled canvas sheet from a shelf raised near the rafters. Anything valuable is stored above floor level, protected from sudden water, wandering rodents, and careless boots. The shelf holds a small tin box, spare line, a bundle of candles, several hooks wrapped in cloth, and matches sealed inside a glass jar. Dry matches have authority here. Without them, a damp evening grows very long. He unrolls the canvas over the second bunk, smoothing it across the boards beneath your blanket. The canvas is stiff and stained, yet it creates a barrier between your body and whatever moisture the wood has been collecting. It is not luxurious bedding. It is an argument against waking with damp clothes and a back chilled by a floor that never forgot the water below. You lower yourself cautiously. The bunk bends with a slow complaint, then holds. It is narrow enough that turning in your sleep will require careful negotiation. One side touches the wall, where a thin draught slips through a seam between boards. The other opens toward the room, giving you a clear path to fall onto the floor, should your dreams become unusually active. A pillow would be welcome. None appears. Instead, your host hands you a folded coat, rolled firmly into a bundle. Its fabric smells of rain, smoke, and the faint salty trace of sweat. You place it at the head of the bunk and decide that modern standards of hospitality are entirely too demanding. A pillow is simply something soft beneath your head. Tonight, the definition becomes delightfully flexible. The shelter has no separate rooms, because separation wastes lumber and interrupts airflow. There is one enclosure for sleeping, storing, repairing, and waiting out weather. A wooden shutter on either side can be lifted using a simple prop stick. When open, each opening invites a little moving air. When closed, the room becomes hotter, darker, and safer from driving rain. You try one shutter yourself. The board is heavier than expected, swollen slightly by humidity. It lifts with a scrape and reveals a screen of night beyond, threaded with tree limbs and silver patches of reflected lantern light. Air enters at once, barely cooler than the room, yet welcome against your face. It carries the smell of wet leaves and distant flowering plants. Something small thuds against the outer wall. You let the shutter drop. On the far side of the shelter, a row of nails holds practical treasures: a long shirt, a wide hat, a pair of leather gloves, a patched rain cape, and a cloth bag hang in silent order. Clothing in this environment is more than modest covering. Long sleeves protect skin from scratching plants, sun, thorns, biting creatures, and the irritating touch of branches while moving through tight waterways. Your own sleeves feel suddenly sensible, despite their damp grip upon your arms. You run a thumb across the fabric and find a fine layer of grit settled there. In the filtered lantern glow, even your hands appear changed, glossy with humidity and marked by the wood you touched. The swamp leaves evidence quickly. It dislikes visitors pretending to remain untouched. A small broom stands near the entrance, made from bundled twigs tied around a straight handle. Your host takes it up and sweeps the floor with short, careful strokes. Bits of bark, dried mud, fish scale, and crushed leaves collect near the doorway. The gesture appears domestic and almost comforting, until a large spider hurries from beneath a crate and disappears behind the wall planks. Your host continues sweeping without comment. You admire his emotional discipline. Raising the floor discourages some unwanted visitors. Although not every visitor respects architectural intention, rats can reach stored food. Spiders appreciate dry corners. Roaches enjoy nearly any arrangement humans provide. Small snakes sometimes follow prey wherever prey chooses to hide. A camp must remain orderly not because order feels pleasant, but because scattered scraps invite nighttime negotiations you would prefer to avoid. A wooden box near the wall receives particular attention. Its lid closes tightly, and a smooth stone rests on top for additional persuasion. Inside are dry goods wrapped in cloth, perhaps meal, rice, coffee, or salt. Such supplies represent more than supper. They represent labour, boat travel, expense, and the unpleasant knowledge that losing food in an isolated camp means remaining hungry or leaving work unfinished. Salt deserves special respect. In damp weather, it clumps rapidly, drawing moisture from the air until it becomes stubborn and heavy. The small supply here is kept inside a covered jar, precious for seasoning, preserving catches, and making plain meals less mournful. You imagine trying to improve a meal with wet salt scraped from a cloth bag. The idea has very little romance. Near the roof beam hangs a curious item, a small bundle of dried herbs tied with string. Their scent emerges when the air shifts, sharp and green beneath the stronger odours of smoke and damp timber. People have long used aromatic plants in homes and camps, sometimes for scent, sometimes for insects, sometimes because a grandmother insisted upon it with remarkable confidence. Whether this particular bundle truly protects anything remains uncertain. It does improve the smell. The wall planks deserve study, since they seem determined to let you study the landscape through their cracks. Each board varies in width, colour, and age. Some were likely cut for the shelter. Others may have been salvaged from damaged structures, boats, crates, or abandoned work sites in remote places. Useful lumber rarely retires politely. It begins another job. Cypress wood became especially valued in Louisiana because it resists rot better than many other woods when exposed to wet conditions. Vast cypress forests once supported a major logging industry, with lumber used for homes, shingles, boats, barrels, and structures needing endurance in humid places. Even so, resistance is not invincibility. Water is patient, and patience is one resource the swamp never lacks. You crouch beside a lower plank and find the edge softened by age. Your finger presses gently into the grain, revealing a shallow groove. Perhaps the board has endured seasons of splash, storm, and water rising against it. Perhaps some former occupant noticed the weakness and intended to replace it. Intentions often fade quickly when a board continues standing despite its flaws. Construction here is a sequence of compromises. A tighter wall blocks wind and rain, yet traps heat inside. A more open wall breathes better, yet admits insects and damp mist. A heavier roof resists storms, yet demands stronger supports. A larger platform holds more gear, yet costs additional labour and lumber, while offering more surface for decay to claim. You suddenly understand why the shelter feels spare. Every extra board asks to be carried, cut, fastened, protected, and replaced. Nothing arrives easily through narrow water passages. A nail dropped between floorboards cannot be recovered with a casual bend of the knee. It vanishes into mud below, joining an invisible collection of useful things lost through human clumsiness. You notice several empty bottles arranged upside down along a beam. They catch the lamplight in green and amber flashes, strangely decorative among the battered tools. One may serve as a container for lamp oil, another could protect small objects from dampness. A third may simply remain because someone liked the colour. Even hard places leave room for small, unnecessary beauty. A faint rustle rises beneath your bunk. You stop breathing for a moment, listening. The sound comes again, slower now, followed by a soft tapping against a post below the floor. Your host leans toward the open doorway, listens once, then settles back without reaching for a tool. Whatever occupies the lower world has failed to impress him. Yuban lacking his experience to remain thoroughly impressed on its behalf. There is no cellar, naturally. Digging beneath a swamp camp would create a muddy joke with very poor storage capacity. Beneath the raised floor lies open darkness, allowing water, air, and creatures to move freely. The arrangement protects the room from flooding during ordinary conditions. Yet it also means you sleep above a shifting-sounding space that does not belong to you. You lean down, foolishly curious, and peer through a narrow gap between boards. Lantern light slips into the opening, touching one post and a slick patch of water beneath. A tiny ripple widens outward, then meets the shadowed timber. You see no animal. This is not entirely reassuring. Hidden movement seems more imaginative than visible movement, and imagination is energetic tonight. Workers sometimes built camps quickly, adapting them for seasons, particular fishing grounds, trapping routes, or timber operations. Researchers continue to debate how representative surviving structures and recorded descriptions are, since temporary camps often decayed, vanished, or changed repeatedly through repair. The ordinary shelter rarely preserves itself neatly for future study. It is too busy being used until it cannot stand. You sit upright and examine the joints holding the bunk together. Wooden pegs reinforce some pieces, while nails secure others. A strip of cloth has been wrapped around one sharp corner, saving sleepers from meeting it during a restless turn. That modest kindness touches you more than expected. Whoever tied it there understood that misery need not be improved by unnecessary bruises. Your host takes down a length of rope and threads it through 2 iron rings fixed beneath the roof. With several practiced pulls, he makes a line across the room for damp clothing. Your shirt may be hung there overnight, although it will probably remain almost as damp in the morning. Here, drying is often less an achievement than a hopeful direction. You remove your outer shirt and hang it carefully. The air against your undershirt feels cool for several seconds, then warm moisture closes around you once more. Your skin prickles as the room breathes through its gaps and shutters. The shelter never fully separates you from the outside world. It only gives that world walls to touch first. The lamp flame flickers lower, and your host trims its wick. Soot briefly scents the air, mingling with the herbs, canvas, wet boards, and aged clothing. Light settles into a calmer glow, gentle enough for sleep, weak enough to leave corners uncertain. Your bunk waits beneath its hanging net, canvas stretched beneath the blanket, folded coat prepared for your head. You lift the blanket and slide onto the narrow boards. The coat pillow has one firm button exactly where your cheek prefers softness, so you adjust it with slow determination. The bunk creaks, the rope line sways, and the floor answers with a muted wooden sigh. At last, your body grows still though your attention remains wide awake. Above you, roof metal ticks softly as cooling air touches it. Beside you, a loose shutter taps once, then rests. Beneath you, water nudges posts with a whispering sound, delicate but impossible to ignore. The shelter holds these noises together, not silencing the swamp, only arranging its voice into something a tired person might gradually accept. You place one hand on the rough blanket and feel it scratch against your palm. There is safety in the raised floor, safety in the roof, safety in stored matches, sealed food, canvas bedding, and the stubborn workmanship of people who understood wet country. Yet every protection remains conditional. Each has limits. Each must be watched, repaired, and respected. The structure is not a fortress. It is a pause above mud. As your eyelids begin to grow heavier, the little cabin seems less crooked and more intelligent. Its uneven posts, patched roof, airy walls, suspended supplies, and narrow bunks answer the demands of a world where solid ground cannot be assumed. Comfort matters here, certainly, but usefulness comes first. Luxury is a dry match, a sound roof, and boards that hold until morning. You settle deeper into the blanket, listening as the building gives another quiet creak. Perhaps it is only the timber adjusting beneath your weight. Perhaps the posts are shifting slightly in their underwater beds. Either way, you lie very still, grateful that the shelter has chosen, for this moment, to remain exactly where it is. The pot beside the small stove begins to warm, and supper suddenly feels more important than hunger alone. In a place surrounded by water, food is comfort, strength, routine, and a quiet measurement of preparation. You sit near the fire, knees drawn slightly upward, while your host opens the cloth sack with careful hands. Inside rests a small store of cornmeal, a twist of salt, an onion, and 2 cleaned fish wrapped in broad leaves. The fish are modest, silver skin dulled by handling, their cool bodies carrying the clean, sharp smell of river water. Nothing about the meal suggests abundance, yet in the heavy darkness, each ingredient seems worthy of ceremony. Your stomach agrees immediately. A knife flashes in the lamplight as the onion is peeled. Its papery skin drops into a tin bowl, making a dry whisper among the damp sounds surrounding you. Soon the knife chops through pale flesh with a steady rhythm, and the familiar scent rises sharply. Your eyes sting. It is almost pleasant to suffer from something so ordinary. The fish receive only salt and a light dusting of meal. There is no cupboard filled with sauces, no cool pantry, no market around a convenient corner. Supplies brought into a working camp must travel by boat, remain protected from dampness, and endure heat without spoiling quickly. Simple ingredients are not evidence of a dull imagination. They are the companions least likely to betray you. Your host sets a shallow iron pan over the stove. A spoonful of fat melts slowly, turning glossy as it slides across black metal. When the fish touch the pan, they answer with an immediate hiss, bright and lively. The sound cuts through the frogs and insects, gathering your attention more efficiently than any polite invitation to dinner. The smell changes everything. Warm oil, onion, salt, browned cornmeal, and fresh fish begin pushing aside the odours of wet timber and stagnant water. For several grateful minutes, the swamp camp smells almost generous. Smoke rises with the steam, drifting past your face in soft waves. You breathe through your mouth, then change your mind and breathe deeply through your nose. Cooking fish near the source of the catch was common sense for wetland workers. Louisiana waters supplied catfish, gar, buffalo fish, perch, and other catches, depending upon place, season, method, and local custom. Some fish went straight to the pan, others were salted, dried, smoked, or carried out quickly, because warm weather never provided much patience for delay. You watch the fish edges turn crisp and golden. A little onion catches against the pan and browns almost too far, releasing a sweet smell beneath the sharper smoke. Your host turns each fish with a narrow metal utensil, keeping the flesh whole. He performs the movement with quiet confidence, as though the meal deserves respect precisely because it is plain. Beside him, a covered pot begins to tremble gently. Water inside has been brought to a boil, not for tea alone, but because care has its own rhythm in isolated places. You can see water in every direction outside the walls, glimmering darkly through openings. Yet the water held in that little pot seems more valuable than the entire flooded world. Surface water may carry bacteria, parasites, sediment, and traces of whatever animals have visited upstream or nearby. You cannot judge safety by clarity, coolness, or a pleasing reflection of moonlight. People in camps relied upon collected rainwater, transported water, springs where available, or boiling when uncertainty remained. Thirst encourages optimism. Illness punishes it. The pot lid rattles lightly. You are given an enamel cup, its rim chipped in one place to reveal dark metal beneath. Steam rises as boiled water is poured over a pinch of coffee in a small tin vessel. The coffee is not refined. It smells strong, smoky, and slightly bitter. The sort of drink intended to persuade a tired body that it can continue making sensible decisions. A curious method appears when your host drops a small splash of cold water into the boiled coffee. The dark grounds settle more quickly toward the bottom. Camp cooks across many regions have used tricks like this, while others trusted eggshells, patience, or a careful pouring hand. Nobody needs a graceful cup at this hour. They only need most of the grit to remain elsewhere. You raise the cup with both hands. Its heat settles into your palms, soothing the damp stiffness in your fingers. Your first sip is powerful enough to straighten your posture. The coffee tastes scorched, rough, and excellent. It carries warmth down into your chest, offering reassurance with very little elegance. A second pan receives a mound of cornmeal stirred into hot water. The mixture thickens slowly, pushed around by a wooden spoon until it becomes a simple porridge. A small portion of browned onion is folded through it, followed by a careful pinch of salt. The result is unlikely to inspire a banquet painter, but the smell promises fullness, and fullness has considerable charm tonight. Cornmeal mattered greatly in many southern kitchens because it stored more easily than fresh bread, and could become many meals. It could thicken a pot, form cakes, create mush, coat fish, or stretch limited provisions when labour remained demanding. In a camp where space is scarce and heat is relentless, adaptable food earns loyalty quickly. Your host places a tin plate before you. A fish lies across the centre, flanked by steaming cornmeal and a few softened onions. You wait until he begins eating, then lift a piece of crisp skin with your fork. The outside cracks delicately. The inside yields in hot, tender flakes, carrying salt, smoke, and the mild sweetness of fresh fish. For several bites, you forget to be uneasy. The food requires attention because tiny bones demand patience. Your fork separates flesh carefully, lifting morsels through the lantern glow. Somewhere outside, water shifts against roots, and a night bird offers a low, questioning note. Yet your world has narrowed pleasantly to the plate upon your knees. The heat of coffee and the satisfying scrape of fork against tin. Hunger makes a skilled seasoning. Not every wetland meal depended upon a fresh catch prepared so quickly. Salt pork, rice, beans, dried peas, molasses, coffee, flour, meal, and preserved foods travelled well when properly protected. Local resources could supplement such stores with fish, game, shellfish, edible plants, or gathered ingredients known through experience. That knowledge mattered. Eating the wrong attractive berry could turn a difficult night into a particularly educational one. A small jar is opened and passed toward you. Inside is a thick, dark syrup, sweet and faintly smoky. You drizzle a little over the remaining cornmeal, and suddenly the humble bowl becomes surprisingly comforting. Sweetness in a hard setting arrives like an unexpected compliment. You find yourself eating more slowly, allowing each mouthful to last. The jar receives its lid again at once. Ants do not require formal notice of dessert. Neither do mice, roaches, raccoons, nor any other creature possessing a nose and questionable boundaries. Every scrap must be contained or discarded away from the sleeping area. Leaving supper uncovered is less an act of generosity than a written invitation to an audience you never intended to entertain. Your host gathers the fish bones into a folded leaf, ties it with string, and places it near the doorway for removal. No remains are tossed carelessly beneath the platform. A camp that smells strongly of discarded food may attract scavengers, and scavengers can attract larger curiosity. Even a small waste pile becomes significant when you are planning to sleep a few feet away from it. The sweetness disappears from your mood slightly. There is also the matter of the cooking fire. It must burn warmly enough to prepare supper and provide smoke, yet not throw sparks into dry cloth or roof material. Wet surroundings can mislead careless people into assuming fire poses little danger. A shelter contains boards, netting, bedding, stored goods, oil, and perhaps clothing hung overhead. One floating ember can become an extremely rude ending to a meal. Your host shifts the stove lid and reduces the flame. Orange light settles lower, and the pan gives a final crackle as its heat diminishes. He pours a small amount of hot water into it, lifting browned fragments with a scrape of the utensil. Washing cookware immediately uses less water, and prevents hardened remains from clinging to the metal by morning. You take your plate to the edge of the platform, where a bucket holds a measured amount of wash water. It feels strange to ration washing while surrounded by liquid darkness. You wipe the plate with a scrap of cloth, rinse it briefly, then return it to a shelf. The action is plain, almost dull. Yet every plain action here prevents some future inconvenience from becoming impressive. A second cloth is used for the knife and fork. They're dried carefully rather than left shining with moisture. Metal rusts quickly in humid places, and tools neglected for only a short while begin displaying their complaints in orange patches. A useful blade is not casually surrendered to dampness. It is cleaned, dried, sharpened, and placed where fumbling hands can find it. The small tin box receives the remaining cornmeal and salt. The syrup jar is wrapped once in cloth and stored beside it. Coffee is sealed tightly. The onion skin and cooking scraps join the fish bones in their leaf packet. When the camp returns to order, hardly any sign of supper remains except for the pleasant weight in your stomach and the smell trapped in your clothes. A laughable little detail catches your attention. Near the stove stands a smooth stick with several notches cut into its handle. You assume it measures water or marks catches, but your host uses it to scratch an unreachable spot between his shoulders. Its solemn notches appear to record nothing more historic than determined relief from insect bites. Tools acquire unexpected careers in small camps. There is still disagreement among historians over whether surviving descriptions of swamp camp meals reflect ordinary daily eating or unusually memorable accounts preserved by visitors and storytellers. A working meal was often repetitive, governed by season, income, available supplies, and luck. Yet a simple fried fish supper, eaten while darkness pressed against rough boards, could become memorable without needing invention. Your cup now contains only a shallow stain of coffee grounds. You tip it slightly, judging whether the final mouthful is worth the likely grit. It is not. Some decisions reveal wisdom faster than others. You set the cup aside, pleasantly warm inside and mildly pleased with your growing ability to avoid unnecessary suffering. Beyond the cooking area, the air has thickened with night scents. Fried fish fades beneath wet leaves, smoke, warm mud, and the green breath of plants. Tiny insects hover around the dimmer lamp, no longer competing with the brighter fire. Their wings make a nearly invisible shimmer whenever they cross the light, like moving specks of dust in a room that happens to contain an entire wilderness. Your host lifts the waste packet and carries it down to the boat, placing it inside a covered container for disposal away from camp. The pirogue rocks softly beneath his shifting weight. You remain on the platform, holding the lantern near the doorway. The task lasts only moments, yet you feel exposed while the familiar activity of supper leaves the room. A sudden splash erupts somewhere near the reeds. Your hand tightens around the lantern handle. The flame trembles inside its glass chimney, scattering yellow movement over the walls. Your host pauses, listens, and returns without urgency. Perhaps a fish jumped. Perhaps a turtle slipped from a log. Perhaps your imagination has discovered that uncertainty digests a meal very efficiently. He places the container down and checks that the food box is firmly closed. Then he wipes the stove rim, sets the clean pan upside down, and covers the water vessel. His movements are slow, neither hurried nor sleepy. In this setting, neatness resembles a form of quiet magic. Everything stored correctly becomes one less worry moving through the darkness. Your stomach is full now, but your mouth remains aware of salt and smoke. You take a small drink of cooled boiled water, letting it clear the lingering coffee bitterness. The water tastes plain, almost flat, yet its safety gives it a rare luxury. No sweetness could improve it more than the knowledge that it has been treated with care. The final glow beneath the stove shrinks to red points. Heat softens around your knees, no longer driving back damp air with the same strength. You feel the camp breathing again through its open gaps, carrying distant water sounds, and the gentle chorus of creatures conducting their own searches for food. Every life nearby seems occupied with eating or avoiding being eaten. Your meal has ended much more peacefully. The cleaned plate waits on its shelf. The spoon hangs from a nail. The sealed stores rest above reach. The lantern remains low, conserving oil while preserving a small circle of visibility. You brush a crumb from your lap, then check carefully that it has fallen into your palm rather than between the boards. Even a crumb feels capable of starting an argument tonight. You lean back against the wall, feeling rough timber through your shirt. Supper has not transformed the camp into a comfortable home. It has done something quieter and perhaps more useful. It has given structure to the darkness, warm food to your body, clean water to your cup, and simple tasks to your restless thoughts. Outside, hidden currents move through the flooded trees. Inside, your breathing grows slower, softened by warmth and the pleasant heaviness of a completed meal. Survival, you realize, does not always announce itself with dramatic struggle. Sometimes it appears as a carefully closed jar, a dried knife, a boiled cup of water, and fish bones carried well away from your bed. The last stripe of purple sky slips away beyond the cypress tops, and the air seems to change its intention. For a few minutes, the wetland had been merely warm, close, and noisy. Now a higher note enters the darkness, thin at first, then layered, then impossible to separate from your thoughts. A mosquito settles near your eyebrow. You lift a hand quickly, but it leaves before your palm arrives. Another drifts beside your ear, its whine delicate and maddeningly precise. A third circles the back of your neck, finding the narrow strip of skin your collar does not cover. You had expected insects. You had not expected them to seem so organized. Your host stands near the stove and adds a handful of green leaves to the low flame. They do not burn cleanly. They smoulder, curling into a thick ribbon of smoke that pushes beneath the roof and floats through the open sides of the camp. Your eyes water almost at once, yet the cloud feels strangely welcome. You are choosing between discomforts now. Smoke offers protection without offering peace. It irritates your throat, clings to your hair, and rolls unpredictably whenever the breeze changes. Still, when a grey stream of it passes your face, the circling insects retreat slightly. The relief lasts only moments. In a swamp camp, moments are apparently valuable currency. You draw your sleeves down as far as possible and fasten the collar higher against your throat. Your hands remain exposed, as do your cheeks and forehead. The insects notice every omission with professional enthusiasm. Their bites do not announce themselves immediately. They leave a tiny sting, followed by an itch that builds patiently, like a complaint waiting for your attention. Soon, you're resisting the urge to scratch. That resistance lasts poorly. The first bite on your wrist becomes a raised, pale bump. The second appears near your thumb. A third brightens along your jaw. You rub at each one gently, knowing rubbing is not especially sensible, while also knowing that sensible behaviour becomes difficult when your skin feels as though it has developed many tiny, demanding opinions. In southern wetlands, mosquitoes could shape the entire rhythm of an evening. People adjusted clothing, sleeping places, fires, screens, and work habits around the thickest swarms. Some tasks became easier in a brighter daytime heat than during the cooler hours when biting insects emerged in force. The setting sun could offer beauty, but it could also sound the opening bell for a very unequal contest. Your host takes a rag and waves smoke toward the doorway, then toward the bunks. He moves with slow care, as though shepherding a troublesome animal rather than battling thousands of nearly invisible attackers. Smoke pools briefly beneath the hanging mosquito net, filling the sleeping space with its dry, bitter smell before lifting through the folds. You stare at the net with growing devotion. Its fabric has been tied securely above the bunk, then arranged so the lower edges can tuck beneath the bedding. Any loose gap defeats the whole arrangement. A mosquito does not require a doorway, it requires an oversight. A fold left open near your ankle may become the evening entrance to a dining room with only one customer. You inspect each edge with both hands. Your fingertips glide over the thin mesh, finding tiny knots, old repairs, and one patch stitched over a tear. The repair is hardly elegant. It is also beautiful beyond measure. You imagine the person who noticed that opening while half asleep, then chose to repair it rather than surrender another night of blood and muttered resentment. The mesh smells of dust and smoke. You welcome both. A small earthen dish appears beside the bunk, filled with smouldering material gathered from the stove. It releases smoke more gently than the main fire, sending a lazy haze upward near the netting. Such methods have appeared in many places where insects trouble sleepers, using smoke from damp vegetation, wood, or other available materials to discourage biting pests. The dish remains a careful distance from cloth and bedding. Safety can never sleep completely. You sit near the bunk, reluctant to crawl beneath the net too soon. Inside, you may avoid some bites, but you will also lose the cooling touch of moving air. Outside, the humid breeze reaches you occasionally, carrying relief followed by fresh insects. Your decision becomes a debate between suffocation and supper. With you serving as the supper, the mosquitoes are not alone. Minute flying insects drift close to the lamp, forming restless constellations above its glass. Larger moths knock against the chimney with papery wings. Somewhere near the shutter, a beetle scrapes along wood with surprising determination. A slender insect lands upon your sleeve, so delicate that it resembles a floating thread. You regard it suspiciously anyway. Then comes a heavier humming near the roof, followed by a swift darting shape. A dragonfly has entered the lighted space, still hunting later than you expected. It pauses on a hanging line, translucent wings gleaming faintly. For one brief moment, you consider it an ally, a graceful little guard assigned to reduce your tormentors. It departs without accepting responsibility. People have used many remedies against biting insects, some practical and some less convincing. Smoke, protective clothing, netting, and screen spaces provided real barriers. Oils, plant rubs, and aromatic mixtures sometimes offered temporary discouragement. Other treatments relied mostly upon hope, habit, or the reassuring confidence of whoever suggested them. Your host uncorks a small bottle and tips a few drops into his palm. The sharp smell reaches you immediately, herbal and oily, with a trace of something medicinal. He rubs it along his wrists and neck, then passes the bottle across. You follow his example, coating your exposed skin with the mixture. It feels greasy, though pleasantly cool, for several seconds. The mosquitoes hesitate. Several return shortly afterward, apparently willing to endure unusual seasoning. You almost laugh, because annoyance has reached the stage where humour becomes necessary. One small creature has taken position beside your ear, returning each time you wave it aside. Its sound seems magnified by the darkness, a fine wire drawn directly through your patience. It is remarkable that a creature weighing almost nothing can occupy nearly every thought you possess. Another bite appears at your temple. Biting insects brought more than lost sleep and swollen skin. During the 19th century, Louisiana suffered severe mosquito-borne disease, especially yellow fever epidemics that devastated communities, with New Orleans repeatedly struck through its position as a busy port city. Malaria also burdened lowland regions, affecting families and workers through chills, fever, weakness, and recurring illness. People did not always understand why danger gathered around them. Before mosquito transmission became established scientifically, explanations for fevers often centered upon foul air, decaying vegetation, filth, climate, or mysterious seasonal influences. In a wet place rich with smells and vapors, such beliefs could seem entirely reasonable. The air itself feels thick enough to conceal any number of punishments. You breathe smoke and dampness together, feeling history become inconveniently easy to imagine. There is something disturbing about not knowing which bite matters. Most will swell, itch, and fade. Yet for people living here in harsher eras, a mosquito bite could become connected with days of fever and exhaustion, perhaps even fatal illness. The insect gives no warning that one particular landing carries greater consequence than another. It simply arrives, feeds, and leaves. A loud slap rings across the shelter. Your host opens his palm, studies the result briefly, then wipes it upon a rag. The gesture carries no triumph. Victory against one mosquito is too modest to celebrate when countless relatives remain available. You attempt your own slap a moment later and strike only your neck with unnecessary enthusiasm. Your dignity suffers silently. The smoke thickens near the stove, and your eyes begin to sting more seriously. Tears gather at their corners, making the lamplight shimmer into soft golden halos. You move toward the open side for clearer air, then retreat immediately when several insects discover your fresh position. It becomes apparent that every area of the camp possesses its own particular disadvantage. A pale gecko appears on a beam near the lamp, motionless except for its watchful head. Without warning, it darts forward and catches a small flying insect, then returns to stillness as though nothing remarkable occurred. Its tiny meal offers you a curious kind of comfort. At least someone present is enjoying the situation. A superstition once heard in some rural settings held that certain insects gathered more eagerly around particular people because of sweetness in the blood, temperament, or plain bad luck. Modern understanding finds more complicated causes in scent, carbon dioxide, heat, and other attractions. Yet, as you receive another bite while your host sits almost undisturbed, bad luck remains an emotionally persuasive explanation. You tuck your hands beneath your arms. That solves very little. Researchers continue to examine how disease, labour, settlement, and local knowledge interacted across Louisiana wetland life, since written accounts often emphasise dramatic epidemics or unusual hardship rather than the repeated daily misery of the ordinary bites. A night troubled by insects may leave fewer records than a major outbreak, although it shaped countless bodies, tempers, and weary mornings. Your host lifts the mosquito net and motions for you to enter. You bend low, moving carefully so your shoulders do not drag the fabric inward. The bedding feels warm beneath you. Once your feet are inside, he lowers the edge, and you tuck the mesh under the canvas with the concentration of someone sealing the gates of a threatened kingdom. For several moments, nothing happens. Then one mosquito whines inside the net. The sound is so precise, so intimate, that disbelief reaches you before irritation. Somehow, despite all inspection, all smoke, all careful tucking, one visitor has entered with you. It circles above your forehead, invisible against the shadowed mesh. You lie flat, eyes open, listening to its approach and retreat. Your whole bed has become a hunting ground. You raise both hands slowly, waiting. The wine passes near your right ear. You clap carefully, missing it entirely. The insect vanishes into silence. You remain frozen. Not because you are calm, but because stillness feels like strategy. A minute passes. Perhaps it escaped. Perhaps it settled somewhere. Perhaps it has simply decided suspense improves the meal. The wine resumes near your nose. This time, you pull the blanket over your mouth and watch the netting. A tiny shape rests against the pale mesh near the corner above your shoulder. Very slowly, you reach upward. Your palm meets the cloth with a soft pat. When you draw it away, the wine does not return. Peace, at last, is possible. Outside your mesh curtain, the general humming continues without concern. Smoke drifts faintly through the room, softened now into an odour woven through bedding and clothing. The lamp has been lowered, leaving only a warm oval upon the boards. Shadows collect beyond it. But your attention belongs mostly to the net surrounding your narrow resting place. Your skin still prickles. Every old bite seems newly ambitious now that you're lying still. One near your wrist demands scratching, followed by another at your ankle, then one inconveniently placed near the edge of your collar. You resist briefly, surrender gently, then place your hands flat upon the blanket as though restraining two badly behaved guests. Sleep does not arrive quickly. The insect chorus rises beyond the shelter, vast and steady, no longer a collection of individual sounds, but a single breathing presence wrapped around the camp. You begin to understand that a swamp night is not empty darkness. It is crowded darkness, occupied by minute lives whose needs intersect painfully with yours. Beneath the net, you are protected only by threads, smoke, and care. That is not much. Yet the thin fabric rests undisturbed around you, and the wine beside your face has stopped. Your breathing lengthens, slowly matching the distant pulse of frogs and insects. For now, your blood remains your own. A sound rises from the water so quietly that you almost mistake it for the shifting of leaves. It is a smooth, sliding disturbance, followed by a gentle bump against one of the posts. Your body, stretched beneath the hanging fabric, becomes instantly attentive. Whatever touched the camp did not strike it by accident. It seemed to explore the timber, then continue with complete confidence. You lift your head from the folded coat. Through the dim opening, the water appears black and level, broken only by thin bands of lantern colour. Nothing visible explains the sound. The surface looks innocent again, which is a quality you're beginning to distrust. Your host remains seated near the doorway, holding a short pole across his knees. He is not alarmed, yet he is listening. His face has changed from the sleepy patience of a person waiting for rest to the careful stillness of someone reading information delivered by darkness. You do not ask what moved below the platform. His silence already suggests an unhelpfully large number of possibilities. A second disturbance comes from farther away. Water rolls heavily, not with the quick splash of a jumping fish, but with the movement of something broad and deliberate. Reeds tremble at the edge of the visible opening. A pair of shining points appears briefly above the surface, reflecting the weak light, then sinking without a ripple dramatic enough to satisfy your imagination. Alligator eyes catch light remarkably well. A reflective layer in the eye helps these reptiles see in dim conditions, while also giving their gaze that memorable shine when lanterns or lamps reach across water. The American alligator is deeply suited to Louisiana wetlands, using bayous, marshes, lakes, canals, and wooded swamps as places to feed, rest, nest, and travel. Knowing this feels educational. It does not feel soothing. You ease your legs downward, leaving the bunk with more caution than grace. The floor touches your bare feet with a cool, slightly gritty roughness. Your shoes sit near the bunk, and you slide them on without considering whether you truly need them. A person feels better prepared for an alligator while wearing shoes. This may be nonsense, but it is comforting nonsense. Your host raises one finger, asking for stillness, then inclines his head toward the water. Another bellow carries through the trees, lower and closer than the distant call you heard from safety. It begins as a vibration, thickens into a deep growling roar, then fades across the flooded timber. The sound seems far too large to emerge from a creature lying nearly level with the water. During courtship season, adult alligators can bellow to communicate and attract mates. Their calls may carry across wetland spaces with startling power, sometimes accompanied by trembling water above their backs. A large male does not need to rise grandly from the swamp to announce himself. The swamp itself appears willing to deliver his message. Your host finally speaks in a low voice. He tells you to keep hands and feet away from the platform edge, especially in poor light. The advice is simple enough to sound obvious, yet you notice how easily a person might sit with legs dangling above the water, rinsing a plate, adjusting a boat rope, or reaching down after a dropped object. The camp feels smaller immediately. A faint scraping begins near the landing. Something climbs onto a partly submerged log, making short dragging movements against wet bark. You stare until the shape resolves into a turtle, dark-shelled and broad, its head stretched forward with ancient seriousness. It settles beneath a drape of leaves, apparently content with a resting place that has just raised your heart rate considerably. You breathe again, quietly. Louisiana waters hold many turtle species, including sliders, mud turtles, softshell turtles, and snapping turtles. Some were collected for food, while others simply shared the same waterways used by fishers, trappers, and boat travellers. A turtle beside a platform may seem harmlessly picturesque, until you picture fingers searching blindly beneath a log where a large snapping turtle has chosen to remain private. The turtle shifts, exposing the curve of its shell to the faint light. A small frog leaps from the same log, landing with a wet click beside it. The turtle does not react. In your nervous mind, this restraint makes it seem wise, patient, and probably capable of remembering every foolish person who ever underestimated it. A noise erupts above your head. Wings strike leaves, followed by a harsh cry that tears through the gentle chorus of the water. You duck instinctively, turning toward the roof beam. A large bird rises from a nearby cypress limb, passing through the lantern's glow as a shadow with broad, silent wings. Its call comes again farther out, lonely and slightly offended. The wetland contains hunters who use height rather than water. Barred owls, herons, egrets, hawks, and other birds find feeding grounds among fish, frogs, snakes, insects, and small mammals. A heron standing completely still at the shallow edge can resemble an abandoned branch, until its beak strikes with such sudden efficiency that your sleepy ideas about peaceful birds require adjustment. Somewhere near a patch of floating vegetation, a chorus of frogs swells, each call rounded and urgent. One produces a deep, plucked note, like a loose string on a heavy instrument. Another answers with a repeated metallic sound. Their voices turn the water into a crowded conversation, conducted by residents who have no reason to lower themselves for your rest. Frogs belong naturally to this damp world, laying eggs in water and feeding in turn upon smaller lives. They also become food for snakes, birds, fish, mammals, and alligators. Their abundance can signal a thriving environment, although that fact offers little peace when every loud chorus reminds you that predators know exactly where to find supper. A quick line appears across the water. It is narrow, smooth, and moving against the faint reflection of the lamp. At first you assume it is a branch drifting sideways. Branches, however, rarely guide themselves with such tidy purpose. The line reaches a cluster of roots and disappears among them. You whisper a question. Snake? Your host nods once. Louisiana swamp country may contain water snakes, cottonmouths, rat snakes, and other species comfortable around wooded waterways. The cottonmouth, often called a water moccasin, is venomous and capable of swimming. Although many snakes glimpsed near water are non-venomous species blamed for looking suspicious. Darkness does not improve your interest in making accurate identifications from close range. You pull your feet farther beneath your chair. Your host explains that snakes are not interested in staging attacks upon a sleeping traveller. They seek prey, hiding places, warmth, or passage, and usually prefer avoiding larger disturbances. This is reasonable. It is also the kind of reasonable statement that becomes far less persuasive after watching an unidentified snake vanish beneath the roots beside your shelter. Near the wall hangs a long forked stick. You had taken it for a spare pole. Its purpose becomes clearer when your host touches it briefly, then leaves it where it hangs. He does not appear eager to use it. The best encounter with a snake, his gesture suggests, is one managed by distance, patience, and an agreement not to become theatrical. Something grunts within the vegetation on the far side of the camp. The sound is followed by splashing, then a busy snuffling among leaves. It lacks the deep authority of the alligator and the smooth quiet of the snake. Instead, it sounds untidy, greedy, and almost cheerful. Your host gives a faint smile, the first sign that a creature outside is amused rather than concerned him. A raccoon emerges near a low branch, its masked face briefly visible as it inspects the shallows. Its hands move with startling delicacy, reaching among roots and floating debris for anything edible. Raccoons are capable wetland foragers, feeding upon crayfish, eggs, insects, plants, small animals, and any human scraps available to opportunistic noses. The raccoon pauses and looks directly toward the shelter. You feel judged. Perhaps it smelled the fish supper from a considerable distance. Perhaps it makes regular rounds of camps, checking whether humans have become careless. Its gaze lingers with the expression of an innkeeper disappointed by your housekeeping. Finding nothing useful within reach, it slips along the waterline, leaving only tiny movements in the plants. Your host seems pleased that every scrap was secured. A hungry animal may be charming while searching somewhere else. Encouraged to visit a camp repeatedly, it becomes bold, destructive, and considerably less charming. Food storage is not only about protecting provisions, it is about refusing to teach nearby creatures that your sleeping place offers rewards. A soft clicking rises from beneath the landing. You lean toward the doorway, careful to keep a respectable distance. The lantern reveals a few small shapes moving in the wet mud near the post, each lifting tiny claws before retreating into shadow. Crayfish, your host murmurs. Creatures so humble that you nearly laugh at yourself for being startled. Crayfish thrive in many Louisiana waters and wetlands, occupying burrows, ditches, marshy ground, flooded areas, and shallow edges. They are a celebrated food in regional cooking, yet here they seem like industrious little custodians of mud, creeping about beneath grander creatures while paying little attention to your rapidly changing emotions. One crawls backward with sudden speed. You decide it has personality. Not all creatures arrive through sight or sound. A musky odour reaches the platform, wild and sharp, mixing with the wet vegetation. Your host turns his head, sniffing once toward a narrow channel. He says it could be a nutria moving through the growth, or perhaps another animal that has left scent along the bank. Nutria are large semi-aquatic rodents, introduced to Louisiana through the fur trade during the 20th century and later becoming destructive in marsh habitats. Their feeding can damage plant roots and contribute to erosion, leaving fragile wetland areas more vulnerable. They look almost comically large for rodents, with heavy bodies, webbed hind feet, and orange front teeth that appear rather too confident. No nutria steps into view. The smell remains, reminding you that many animals announce their presence without offering the courtesy of an appearance. The water carries scent, vibration, floating debris, broken stems, muddy trails, and ripples whose meanings you cannot read. To a skilled person, the swamp may resemble an open book. To you, it resembles a book written underwater in very small handwriting. Naturalists and historians continue to debate how frequently dangerous wildlife encounters truly shaped daily camp life, since memorable scares are more likely to be retold than ordinary nights of cautious coexistence. Workers faced real hazards, certainly, but they also learned animal habits, respected nesting areas, avoided careless movements, and lived alongside creatures that were usually occupied with their own survival. That measured understanding settles gently into your mind, although not far enough to relax your shoulders. The water beside the platform suddenly breaks apart with a loud, violent slap. You start upward so quickly that your chair legs scrape the boards. A broad tail disappears near the roots, leaving waves rolling beneath the camp. Your host grips the pole, watching the surface until the disturbance fades into small, trembling reflections. An alligator, perhaps surprised by movement, perhaps chasing prey, perhaps simply turning through shallow water with an unnecessarily dramatic tail. No explanation arrives from the darkness. You stand perfectly still, every muscle aware that a wooden platform feels more comforting when nothing powerful is splashing immediately beneath it. A few long breaths pass. The water calms. Your host sets the pole down again, but this time he draws the pirogue rope tighter and checks that nothing dangles temptingly near the edge. You understand the lesson without needing it spoken. This is not a place for casually rinsing your hands below a landing, trailing fingers through cool water, or stepping from the cabin in sleepy confusion. From the tree line comes a soft hooting exchange, gentle and hollow. The sound seems calmer than the bellow, softer than the splash, more suited to the hour. You turn toward it and find the fear in your chest loosening slightly. Animals are not gathering around your shelter for a grand assault. They are feeding, calling, resting, crossing, waiting, and slipping through paths known long before boards were placed above this water. You are the uncertain animal tonight. The lamp glows at your side, warm against your wrist. Beyond its reach, eyes may shine and bodies may move, hidden beneath leaves or mirrored water. Yet the creatures surrounding the camp remain part of the swamp's ordinary night, each carrying on with business you interrupted merely by listening. You return to the narrow bunk, placing your shoes within reach rather than leaving them loosely on the floor. The platform no longer feels like a bed floating over emptiness. It floats above traffic, territory, hunger, mating calls, hiding places, and small secret errands performed in darkness. A final ripple touches the post below you, delicate as a fingertip. You do not look down this time. The first warning is not thunder, but the absence of smaller sounds. The frogs diminish one voice at a time, as though a quiet hand passes across the water. Insects continue their thin singing near the lamp, yet the wider swamp seems to pause. Even the leaves beyond the platform stop stirring in their casual, restless way. You sit upright, listening into the sudden gap. The air has grown heavier, somehow warmer against your face despite the depth of night. A damp pressure gathers around your temples, making your skin feel tight and your breath shallow. From the open side of the shelter, the scent of mud rises strongly, joined by the green, bruised smell of leaves turned over by approaching wind. Your host crosses the room without speaking and lowers one shutter. Its hinges complain as the wooden panel drops into place. He secures it with a short bar, then moves toward the other opening. That practical movement tells you far more than a worried expression would have done. Something is coming. Far beyond the trees, a pale flicker briefly defines the cypress trunks. It vanishes without sound, leaving the watery lanes darker than they seemed a moment earlier. You count silently, not because you understand storms particularly well, but because counting gives your nervous attention a respectable task. Thunder arrives as a low mutter. It moves through the wetland slowly, spreading beneath branches and across the water like a wagon rolling over distant boards. The cabin seems to hear it too. The roof gives a faint metallic tick. A hanging cup trembles lightly on its nail. Beneath your feet, the floor remains steady, although you suddenly notice every uneven plank. Your host lifts the oil lamp from its crate and hangs it on a hook farther from the shutter. Then he checks the tin box, the water container, and the bundle of matches sealed beneath glass. Loose belongings come down from open shelves and are pushed into safer corners. The movements are efficient, gentle, and unmistakably practiced. You reach for your damp outer shirt, then pause, unsure whether dressing more fully will help. He nods toward it, so you pull it on. The fabric is cool at first, then immediately clings to your shoulders again. A storm in a swamp does not promise refreshing air. It promises wetness arriving with force. A second flash reveals trailing moss lifted sideways by wind. This time the thunder comes sooner, sharper, snapping overhead with a crack that sends a shock through your chest. A few drops begin striking the roof. Each one sounds distinct, fat and deliberate, like fingers testing a drum. Then the testing ends. Rain pours down with breathtaking speed, hammering the tin and patch boards until conversation would require shouting. Water rushes from the roof edges in pale sheets, flashing whenever lightning fills the dark openings. The shelter becomes an island inside a roaring curtain, separated from every visible tree by water falling through water. You taste rain spray on your lips. It is cool, clean in sensation, and carried sideways through the narrow seams. A fine mist touches your cheeks, your hands, and the blanket folded near the bunk. Your host presses a strip of cloth into one leaking crack, then places a shallow pan beneath another drop already gathering from the roof. The pan rings when the first drop falls. Soon it rings again. There is something almost absurd about protecting a shelter above endless water from additional water. Yet the problem is not quantity alone. Rain entering bedding steals sleep. Rain entering matches steals fire. Rain entering stored meal steals supper. Rain entering weakened boards encourages rot, and rot eventually steals the shelter itself. Louisiana wetlands have always been shaped by water arriving in different moods. Seasonal rains, river flooding, tropical storms, and hurricanes can change channels, drown low places, damage camps, and rearrange shorelines. People living or working close to these environments learned that weather was not scenery. It was an active force capable of altering every plan. A gust strikes the cabin broadside. The walls shudder once, hard enough to make the lamp flame lean inside its chimney. You grip the edge of the bunk, feeling the frame vibrate through your palm. Somewhere outdoors, a branch breaks with a splintering crack, followed by a heavy splash. The sound is quickly swallowed by rain, leaving you unable to judge where the fallen limb landed. Your host opens a small gap in the shutter and looks out. Rain immediately spits through the opening, flecking his face and shirt. He narrows his eyes toward the landing, then closes the panel again. When he turns, his calm has become concentrated. Each movement reduced to what matters. He reaches for the rope securing the boat. You understand at once. A camp can be repaired. A lost pirogue can leave you stranded in flooded darkness, surrounded by routes you cannot cross on foot. He ties a second line around a stout inner post, bringing the wet rope through the doorway while keeping his body safely above the platform edge. Your fingers join the task, clumsy but willing. The rope feels rough and slimy with rain, dragging cold water along your palm. You hold tension while he makes a secure knot. Outside, the boat knocks against the landing with dull regend, repeated taps, like a visitor insisting upon entry. Another gust swings it sharply aside. The rope holds. Lightning opens the night in a single white glare. The swamp appears for one astonishing instant, stripped of softness and mystery. Trees bend under wind. Water dances wildly beneath the rain. Leaves race along the surface. A broken limb floats near the platform, turning slowly as current and wind disagree about its direction. Darkness closes again, thicker for having been interrupted. Rainwater begins to find routes through the shelter you had not noticed. A thin stream creeps beneath the doorway, spreading across a lower board in a reflective tongue. Your host places an old rag against it, then nudges a crate of supplies onto higher flooring. You take the tin dishes from their shelf, stacking them safely where trembling walls cannot shake them down. The floor feels different beneath your shoes. It is not moving dramatically, yet a subtle vibration reaches upward from the posts whenever wind strikes. Water below must be restless now, slapping timber, lifting floating branches, tugging at roots. The cabin stands above disturbance, but it cannot pretend that disturbance is not present. A smell of extinguished smoke fills the room. The cooking fire, reduced to embers, hisses as wind-driven spray reaches it through a gap. Its last orange glow dims beneath wet ash, leaving the lamp as your only warm light. The loss feels larger than expected. Without the stove, the shelter seems cooler, less inhabited, more like boards holding out against weather. A chill settles along your wet sleeves. The roof amplifies every change in the rain. Heavy drops thunder overhead, then soften briefly into rapid tapping, then return as a pounding flood. In the uneven rhythm, you begin imagining damage with each louder burst. A loosened sheet of tin might peel away. A branch might strike the roof. A post might fail below, dipping one corner into the rising black water. Such thoughts require no invitation. Your host hands you a tin cup and gestures toward a barrel positioned beneath a roof channel. Rainwater pours into it from a slanted piece of metal, chattering loudly against the container. You hold the lamp while he secures a clean cloth across the opening to screen falling debris. Capturing rainwater is a sensible habit in a place where safe drinking water requires attention. The little barrel fills with surprising speed. Rain collected from a reasonably clean surface may provide useful water, although people still had to consider leaves, insects, dirt, animal traces, and the condition of roofing materials. In wetland camps, rainfall could be both threat and gift, threatening shelter while replenishing supplies. The sky is not required to choose one roll at a time. A tremendous boom lands almost directly overhead. The lamp glass trembles. You flinch so sharply that a little oil sloshes within its chamber. Your host steadies the lantern hook with one hand, then glances toward the roof. No flame touches spilled fuel, and the chimney remains intact. Still, you feel suddenly aware that fire and storm can cooperate in unpleasant ways. He lowers the lamp flame slightly. Now shadows thicken around the walls. The shelter smells of lamp oil, wet rope, soggy cloth, rainwater, and the raw scent of freshly broken wood outside. The rain continues hard, but a deeper noise has joined it, a rushing movement beyond the landing. Water is travelling with purpose through channels hidden in darkness. You kneel near the doorway, careful not to open it widely. Through a narrow crack beneath the shutter, you see the platform edge gleaming in lightning flashes. Water below has climbed closer to the boards. A floating cluster of leaves catches briefly against one post, twirls twice, then pulls free. Your mouth goes dry despite all the rain. Elevated camps offered protection only within limits. A modest rise in water might pass beneath the flooring without serious trouble. Stronger flooding could threaten landings, supplies, boats, supports, and escape routes. Workers who knew particular wetlands watched water levels closely, reading currents, debris, wind, and the behaviour of familiar channels. You do not know the familiar signs. You only know that the water looks nearer. Another odd little preparation appears when your host removes his boots, empties them, and sets them upside down on a raised peg. He then places a dry scrap of cloth inside a covered pot. You stare at the arrangement until he explains that soaked boots are miserable, but dry cloth for wrapping feet can make a wet morning tolerable. Practical wisdom often looks faintly ridiculous until your own feet are cold. You copy him, keeping your shoes close but protected from the spreading floor moisture. The wet leather releases an earthy smell as you lift it away. Your socks feel clammy, so you remove them and squeeze out a discouraging amount of water. Bare toes curl against the cool board, grateful for even limited dryness. Some accounts of wetland living describe storms as decisive dangers, while others suggest ordinary leaks, soaked provisions, and repeated minor flooding wore people down more steadily. Scholars continue to disagree about which hardships later storytellers emphasize beyond their everyday importance. Drama leaves strong memories, yet small discomforts can exhaust a person with quieter persistence. Tonight the storm generously offers both. A heavy object strikes beneath the platform. The entire cabin jerks once, violently enough to send the stacked cups sliding sideways. You catch them against your knee, hearing their sharp clatter beneath the rain. Your host seizes the pole and peers through the shutter gap, lamp held low behind him. A branch has lodged against the posts. It is thick, waterlogged, and driven sideways by current. Each surge presses it again into the timber, producing a deep knock below the floor. Left there, it could batter the supports repeatedly. Your host studies it, then shakes his head. Climbing outside during lightning and fast water would exchange one danger for several greater ones. You sit with the knocking. Each impact arrives through your legs and spine. The shelter remains upright, yet the branch turns the storm into something that touches you personally. Rain can be endured as noise. Wind can be endured as shaking. A log knocking against the structure beneath your body feels like a question, repeated until answered. Knock, water rushes. Not. The lamp flame wavers. Eventually the current changes its grip. A stronger surge twists the branch loose, scraping it along the lower timber with one final grinding protest. It drifts away into the blackness. Your host releases a breath so slowly that you realize he had been holding it. The rain begins to soften, not suddenly, and not kindly, but enough that separate sounds return. Water dripping from the roof edge, the barrel overflowing in a steady trickle, leaves shedding drops in heavy patters, a distant frog testing one uncertain note. The storm still occupies the wetland, yet its hands seem less tightly pressed around the camp. You remain seated on the raised floor, wrapped in a damp blanket, bare feet tucked beneath you. Coolness has entered the room at last, but it is the uncomfortable coolness of wet clothing and exhausted nerves. Your host checks the knots once more, shifts the pans beneath persistent leaks, and wipes rain from the lamp chimney. Outside, lightning flickers without anger, outlining trees dripping under the retreating rain. The water remains high, cluttered with leaves and floating fragments of branches. The pirogue tugs patiently against both lines, still attached, still ready, still more precious than any chair, cup, or blanket in the shelter. A drop falls from the roof into the pan. Ping. Another follows, softer now. Ping. You listen to that simple sound and let your shoulders sink. The storm has not improved the camp. It has soaked cloth, chilled skin, drowned embers, lifted water, and revealed every weakness in wood and nerve. Yet the posts remain planted, the roof remains overhead, the supplies remain dry, and the little boat remains within reach. For a place so fragile, it is held remarkably well. You draw the blanket around your shoulders and sit quietly in the lamplight, while rain dwindles across the trees into thousands of gentle, exhausted drops. The swamp smells freshly torn open, green and muddy and strangely clean. Beneath the floor, water slips onward through the dark, carrying broken twigs away from the posts. Your shelter creaks once, softly, then rests. The rain leaves behind a world polished, swollen, and inconveniently awake. Water drops from leaves with soft, irregular taps, striking the roof, the landing, and the pirogue tied below. The lamp shows damp tools resting against one wall, their wooden handles shining as though freshly oiled. Your host does not return to bed. Instead, he reaches for a lantern, a basket, and a long pole tipped with a hook. You had thought nighttime meant endurance. Apparently it also means work. He motions toward the landing, where the boat rises and settles upon water crowded with floating leaves. Your legs object as you stand. The shelter has offered only cramped rest, and your joints now feel stiff beneath wet clothing. You pull on your shoes, still cool inside, then follow with the careful obedience of someone who understands that refusing would not make the night gentler. The pirogue shifts when your foot touches its narrow bottom. You grip the platform post, lower yourself slowly, and take a position near the centre. A basket rests between your knees, smelling faintly of fish, woven reeds, and old river mud. Your host places the lantern at the bow, shielded from drifting spray by a bent piece of tin. Its glow reaches only a little distance ahead. The pole pushes against something beneath the surface, and the boat slips away from the shelter. Water parts with a soft whisper along the wooden sides. Branches, moss, and vine-covered trunks close around the narrow passage, leaving no clear horizon. You feel as though the boat is threading itself through a dark room filled with furniture you cannot afford to strike. For many wetland workers, travel itself was part of the labour. Trappers checked lines and traps by boat. Fishers attended nets, baskets, hooks, and trot lines. Hunters navigated flooded routes known through repeated experience. Cypress logging crews moved through places where water, mud, and massive timber made ordinary roads impractical or impossible. The workplace did not wait on dry land. It floated, sank, tangled, and shifted. A snag scrapes the side of the boat. You freeze, gripping the basket. Your host merely angles the pole and presses away from the submerged branch. The pirogue glides onward, rocking gently until your breathing settles. His ease is not laziness. It is the result of countless small judgments made correctly, where the water deepens, where roots catch a hull, where current pulls, and where a dark opening is truly passable. Soon, He slows beside a leaning willow and reaches into the water for a line tied above the flood mark. The line emerges slick and dripping, carrying bits of grass and a green thread of algae. You lean forward while he gathers it hand over hand. Something pulls from below, not violently, but with weight and resistance. A fish breaks the surface. It twists once in the lantern light, pale belly flashing, then lands inside the basket with a hollow thump. You start backward, nearly sending your elbow into the water. The fish beats its tail against wicker, throwing cool droplets across your knees. Its smell rises sharply, clean and metallic, mingling with wet bark and a lamp smoke. One catch does not fill a table for long, yet it represents success. Lines set in likely places could bring food or income, depending upon the size and purpose of the catch. Fishing methods varied widely across Louisiana waterways, from simple hooks to nets, traps, seines, and long lines fitted with many baited hooks. Every method demanded maintenance, knowledge, and a tolerance for handling slippery surprises in poor light. Your host resets the hook with bait taken from a covered tin. He works by touch almost as much as sight, his fingers quick despite the damp cold settling over the water. You try not to watch too closely when the bait is threaded into place. Supper is easier to admire once it has passed through the less poetic stages of becoming supper. The line slips back beneath the surface. A second marker waits deeper among the trees. You recognize it only when your host points toward a strip of pale cloth tied high upon a cypress limb. Without such markings, every dark trunk appears suspiciously similar. The boat turns through a passage barely wider than its own body, and wet leaves brush your shoulder with a cold, sudden touch. You suppress a yelp with modest success. At the next location, there is no fish. The hook rises bare, the bait stolen by some unseen diner possessing both appetite and excellent timing. Your host shakes his head, then gives the line fresh bait without complaint. Empty equipment is not failure worthy of drama. It is simply another demand placed upon tired hands. The lantern attracts small insects, which spin near the bow in trembling loops. Their bodies strike the metal shield with tiny dry ticks. Moist air sits heavily in your lungs. Your damp shirt rubs at the shoulders whenever you shift your weight, and your palms begin to sting where the basket handle presses into softened skin. Work here rarely allows your body to forget the weather. Your boat enters an open pocket of water where several long poles protrude near the surface. A net is stretched between them, its upper edge marked with small floats. Your host secures the pirogue and begins pulling the net upward, section by section. Plant fragments cling to it, along with twigs, leaves, and a writhing assortment of small fish. You help by lifting one wet section across your lap. The weight surprises you. Water trapped within the mesh adds itself to every movement, draining in icy streams down your sleeves. Your fingers catch against knots and fine strands, struggling to separate living catch from vegetable debris. A fish slips free suddenly and lands near your shoe, flapping with determined insult. You capture it on the third attempt. Nets required constant tending. Left unattended, they could snag, tear, fill with unwanted debris, lose fish, or become hazards for animals. A useful net was an investment of time and material, often patched repeatedly rather than discarded. In a camp where every item travelled by boat, a torn mesh was not an excuse to shop for a convenient replacement. It was an evening repair waiting to happen. Among the catch lies a creature shaped like an armoured little visitor from another age. It has a long body, hard scales, and a narrow mouth lined with small teeth. Your host identifies it as a young gar, then releases it carefully into the water. It flicks away with sudden strength, leaving a swirl below the lantern. Gar have lived in North American waters for an extraordinarily long span of natural history, and their hard, diamond-shaped scales were sometimes used by people for small practical objects or ornaments. One old tale claims that gar scales could serve as arrow points or decorative pieces. Depending upon local practice and available materials, The fish seems pleased to have avoided becoming either a stronger smell approaches from downstream, resinous and newly cut beneath the wet air. The pirogue grounds a fallen limb, and the lantern reveals a broad stump rising from shallow water. Its cut surface is pale, huge, and smooth enough to resemble a low table built for giants. Nearby, several logs rest partly submerged, secured by heavy chains. Cypress timber once drew intensive logging into Louisiana wetlands. The wood was sought for its durability, especially in damp conditions, and major logging operations harvested enormous stands of old-growth cypress during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Rails, canals, pull boats, barges, and labour crews opened wooded swamps to commercial removal on a scale earlier generations could scarcely have imagined. You touch the stump as the boat passes close. The cut surface feels slick beneath your fingertips, its rings blurred by rainwater and lantern shadow. The tree must have stood here through storms, floods, nesting birds, falling seeds, and quiet seasons beyond counting. Now it is a flat circle beside a channel, while its trunk waits chained in darkness for transport. The thought makes the surrounding trees seem watchful. Logging in flooded country was never gentle work. Men stood upon slippery timber, handled cables and hooks, worked around machinery, endured insects and heat, and faced dangerous accidents among moving logs. A log floating peacefully beside your boat may weigh more than your shelter and roll without warning. There is nothing dreamy about finding your boot trapped where two heavy trunks decide to meet. Your host uses the hooked pole to push a branch away from one chain. The movement prevents debris from building against the secured timber. You steady the boat while he works, trying not to stare into the gap between the logs. Water sucks and gurgles there, dark, tight, and entirely unwilling to explain its depth. A frog leaps onto one log, resting as though it owns the timber yard. That seems fair enough. Not every person working these waters belonged to a large enterprise. Families and small operators used wetlands for seasonal income, food, hides, fuel, and trade. Trapping could produce pelts from muskrat, mink, otter, raccoon, or nutria in later years, depending upon period and location. Fish, game, moss, timber, and gathered materials could support households whose lives were tied closely to waterways. The romantic swamp wanderer becomes less convincing with every wet task. A trapper must carry equipment, mend damaged gear, protect pelts, read animal paths, handle bait, avoid injuries, and return through weather that has no interest in schedules. Freedom may exist in such labour, perhaps. It arrives with sore hands and clothing that smells permanently of water. Your host turns the boat into a narrow grassy cut. Here. The lantern catches a low platform mounted near the bank. Little more than 2 boards braced above the water. A metal trap has been lifted and secured, empty tonight, its chain wound carefully around a root. You do not ask what might ordinarily be caught there. The bait scent is answer enough. He checks the mechanism with a stick, keeping his fingers clear. The jaws close with a sudden snap, quick enough to make you jerk backward. He resets it with deliberate pressure and positions it once more along the muddy edge. Whatever approaches this trail will meet a device made efficient by simplicity. You find the quiet brutality sobering. Trapping provided money and materials, yet its details were physical, messy, and often harsh. Pelts could be valuable, especially when fashion and trade created strong demand. For workers, the practice meant intimate knowledge of animal habits, water levels, tracks, scents, and seasonal movement. It also meant repeated exposure to cold mud, wet hands, sharp equipment, and catches that demanded a steady temperament. Scholars still debate how completely commercial records capture the lives of independent swamp workers, because ledgers describe sales more readily than fatigue. Skill, family cooperation, or nights spent tending equipment, a payment for fish, hides, or timber leaves evidence on paper. The aching shoulders that produced it usually disappear without written record. Your shoulders are beginning to understand this absence. At another muddy opening, your host points to small prints pressed into the soft bank. Their neat shape suggests a raccoon has passed recently. Beside them lies a broader drag mark, perhaps from a tail or a branch drawn by moving water. He studies both, then moves along without setting anything. Not every sign becomes an opportunity. Judgment includes knowing what to leave undisturbed. The route turns homeward through a channel flecked with tiny floating leaves. You now carry 2 fish, a handful of smaller catch, damp netting awaiting repair, and the heaviness of work performed while your body wanted stillness. The pirogue smells strongly of wet wicker and fish slime. Your fingers have wrinkled from water, while your lower back gives a dull complaint each time the pole nudges the boat onward. A strange gleam hangs from a branch near the root. As you approach, it resolves into a glass bottle tied upside down with cord, a pale rag stuffed within its neck. Your host tells you it marks a turning in high water, when ordinary landmarks vanish beneath flood. A bottle, useless for drinking and too chipped for trade, becomes a tiny beacon among identical trees. Its glass catches the lantern once, then disappears behind you. The shelter eventually emerges from the branches as a dark shape raised above the water. No welcoming light fills its windows, because you carry the lamp that would have made it glow. The landing appears damp and narrow, almost elegant after hours spent inside a rocking boat. You rise carefully and pass the basket upward, arms trembling slightly from the simple act. Once on the platform, you help hang the wet net along pegs where it can be examined. Several small tears open through the mesh, snagged by branch tips or struggling catch. Your host sets out cord and a bone needle, polished smooth from use. A net does not repair itself because its owner is tired. You take the needle when he offers it. Your first knot sits awkwardly, thicker than necessary. The next is better. Slowly, the torn space closes beneath your fingers, while water drips from the lower edge onto boards below. The smell of fish remains sharp nearby, and the lamp warms one side of your face. Beyond the platform, the swamp continues moving without applause, unconcerned by the effort required to gather anything from it. Your hands now carry small marks from rope, net, basket, and damp wood. Your shirt feels heavy upon your back. A single fishtail taps inside the covered container, then settles into silence. The work has produced something useful, yet it has taken far more from your strength than the quiet surface of the water ever suggested. You lower the repaired net onto its hook and flex your sore fingers. A camp does not become livable merely because a person builds walls above water. It remains livable only through repeated labour, performed when tired, bitten, damp, hungry, chilled, or uncertain. The lamp gives a soft hiss. You sit carefully upon the wooden bench, feeling the deep relief of not balancing inside a boat. Around you hang the tools of the wetland night, each plain object carrying the weight of practiced hands. The swamp provides food, timber, hides, travel, and livelihood. It charges for each offering and effort. Your palms rest upon your knees, smelling faintly of rope and fish. Sleep feels earned now. The lantern flame has settled into a low, steady bead, barely large enough to warm the glass chimney. Outside the shelter, the wetland no longer seems restless. It seems watchful. Water slips among trunks without showing its direction, and the wet leaves hold their drops like tiny beads of dim silver. You sit with your hands wrapped around a cooled cup, too tired for work and too alert for sleep. Your muscles feel heavy, yet every quiet noise reaches you with unreasonable clarity. A drip from the roof sounds like a careful footstep. A reed brushing the landing resembles cloth dragged gently across wood. Even your own breathing seems louder than good manners should permit. Your host occupies the bench near the doorway, repairing a torn strap by lamplight. His needle passes through leather with small, deliberate movements. He does not hurry, and he does not appear troubled by the darkness pressing against the open gaps. Perhaps that is why you finally ask whether people ever tell stories about this place. The needle pauses. He gives a low, amused sound, not quite a laugh, and pulls the thread tight. In a swamp, he says quietly. Stories do not require much encouragement. Give a person black water, drifting fog, a long night, and one uncertain noise, and the tale nearly tells itself. That answer is not reassuring. He begins with lights, because lights are always easiest to remember. People moving through marshes and swamps have long reported pale glows hovering above wet ground, or appearing along distant waterways. Some described blue sparks. Others remembered small lantern-like flames that led travellers away from safe routes. A wandering light becomes especially persuasive when you are already unsure where the route lies. You look through the doorway. At first, there is only darkness layered with tree trunks. Then, far beyond the landing, a faint point gleams among the reeds. It is small, weak, and greenish, like the shine from a distant bottle. It appears once, disappears, then reappears several feet away. Your fingers tighten around the cup. The host follows your stare and nods as though the swamp has arrived precisely on cue. Firefly, he says. Perhaps several. He explains that moist summer places can hold clouds of them, their cold little flashes appearing and vanishing among plants. The light is made within their bodies through a chemical process, an efficient glow producing almost no heat. This ordinary explanation sounds quite respectable. The green point flashes again, joined by another. Respectability weakens slightly. Fireflies do not shine merely for your entertainment, although their timing feels theatrical. Their signals help them find mates, with different patterns belonging to different species. A person sitting in the dark may see random blinking. Another firefly may see a perfectly clear conversation conducted with remarkable elegance above the water. You imagine tiny courtships unfolding among the reeds while you sit frightened by romance. Then a larger glow moves low across the surface. It does not blink. It drifts. The host tilts his head, studying it through the doorway. A lantern in a boat, perhaps, hidden partly by trees. Yet no paddle stroke reaches you. No voice carries across the channels. The light continues for several seconds, blurred by thin mist, then fades as though swallowed by a stand of cypress. He returns to his stitching. You wish he had looked more certain. Marsh lights have collected many names in different places, including ghost lights, corpse candles, and wandering flames. Some natural explanations involve gases produced by decay, though the exact causes behind specific reported sightings remain difficult to prove. Other reports may come from fireflies, reflected lamps, distant boats, luminous fungi, mistaken stars, or eyes weary from staring into dark, wet spaces. A tired mind is generous with mystery. The thread snaps softly as your host cuts it with his knife. He hangs the repaired strap near the tools, then reaches for a small cloth pouch. Inside lies a twist of dried leaves, which he adds to a cup of hot water warmed above a faint coal. The scent rises gently, mint-like and earthy, smoothing the sharp odour of wet wood. He hands the cup to you. You sip carefully. Warmth settles against your tongue, mild and green, offering the sort of comfort that does not challenge the darkness directly. You begin to understand why a person might tell stories in such a place. A voice creates a little room of its own, a space where whatever waits outside must listen rather than enter. The next tale concerns a sound, not a sight. He describes travellers hearing a baby crying from a distant bank. Faint and pleading among the trees, a stranger might push toward it, imagining a child lost near the water. Someone more familiar with the wetlands might remain very still, because certain animals can make calls that unsettle listeners through their surprising resemblance to human distress. As if summoned, a harsh wail rises somewhere beyond the shelter. It climbs, catches, and drops away. The cup stops halfway to your mouth. Your host smiles without showing teeth. A cat, he says. Perhaps a bobcat. Their cries can sound disturbingly personal at night. The words help, but the sound itself remains attached to the darkness, leaving you with the uncomfortable impression that something has called out in sorrow and received no comfort. Bobcats inhabit varied Louisiana landscapes, including forested and wetland edges where prey is plentiful. They are secretive, mostly avoiding human company, hunting rabbits, rodents, birds, and other small animals. Seeing one clearly would be unusual. Hearing one while stranded in lantern light is apparently more than sufficient. A second cry drifts through the trees farther away. You decide the animal may remain unseen. Your host speaks of another camp custom, one stranger and considerably less alarming. Some workers kept a small piece of chalk, a nail, or a burnt stick near the bed, marking odd sounds, unusual catches, storms, or days of work upon boards. Not every scratch sign meant anything supernatural, yet a visitor finding rows of marks in lamplight could easily imagine warnings, counts, or messages left by someone no longer present. You look down toward the wall beside the bunk. There, almost concealed behind a hanging cloth, are several shallow scratches. They stand in clusters, crossed through by diagonal lines. Your pulse lifts briefly, until your host says they count sacks once stored in the shelter. Inventory, not spirits. A practical explanation for eerie marking seems almost disappointing, though you would rather be disappointed than haunted. One small carving does not resemble a tally. It is a crude hand. 5 fingers spread around a central dot. He notices your attention and shrugs. Someone may have cut it there for luck, to pass an idle hour, or to make the next visitor wonder. Working camps held their own private humour, and a person alone in wet country may enjoy leaving a puzzle behind. You trace the carved shape lightly with one fingertip. The groove feels smooth, worn by time and damp air. Whoever cut it must have sat close to this same wall, listening to water and insects, holding a blade carefully against the timber. For a quiet moment, the mysterious mark seems less threatening than companionable. A faint smell reaches you then, sweet and rotten together. It comes from outside, carried by a slow current of air through the open side. You wrinkle your nose, detecting mud, water plants, and something floral that has become too rich in the heat. The host says low places collect layers of decay, blossoms, dead leaves, fish traces, animal musk, and stagnant pools. Scents combine in ways that can feel meaningful when they are merely crowded. Some people once treated certain sudden smells as signs of spirits or misfortune. A pleasing perfume with no visible blossom or a foul odour arriving in still air might become part of a local tale. Yet the swamp is an accomplished chemist. It keeps mixing its ingredients patiently, producing fragrances no visitor requested. You take another sip of the herbal drink. The sweetness of the air fades, replaced by rain-damp bark. A cluster of tiny blue-white spots glows upon a fallen branch near the waterline. Unlike fireflies, these do not flicker or move. They hold their dim shine steadily, barely visible until your eyes settle upon them. You point, and your host lifts the lantern shield just enough to confirm the source. Rotting wood, he says. Sometimes fungus shines. Bioluminescent fungi can create a soft glow in decaying timber, a phenomenon sometimes called foxfire. In wet forests, faintly glowing wood has startled travellers and nourished stories for generations. A broken limb that shines quietly in the dark does not need a ghost attached to it. It performs perfectly well on its own. The branch looks enchanted anyway. Its tiny gleam reveals a mossy curve and the wet shine of bark, giving the impression of embers that feel no heat. You lean slightly toward the doorway, fascinated despite yourself. Here is the odd little truth beneath many tales. Explanation does not always remove wonder. Sometimes it gives wonder better manners. Your host turns the lamp lower still. The glowing branch becomes clearer while the room softens into shadow. Outside, the fireflies spark at intervals among reeds. Farther away, no mysterious lantern returns. The cat-like cry has ceased. The swamp seems filled with small points of uncertainty, each one gentle enough when viewed alone, yet unsettling when joined within your sleepless thoughts. Historians and folklorists still disagree over how much swamp legend grew from older oral traditions, working camp humour, environmental misunderstanding, commercial entertainment, or later retellings designed to deepen Louisiana mystery. Stories changed as people carried them from boats to porches, from families to visitors, and from lived experience into performance. You can feel how easily the process begins. A ripple catches a firefly flash at precisely the wrong moment. For one instant, a bright line skips across the water like a hand carrying a candle. A night bird makes a low note from a limb hidden above the platform. The foxfire branch glows patiently below. Your tea cools, and fatigue loosens the sensible knots in your mind. You picture a traveller paddling alone through this darkness, steering toward a light believed to mark camp. The light moves, or appears to move, drawing the boat into reed beds and shallow mud. Paddle strokes grow frantic. The route closes around the traveller, but in daylight. There might be nothing sinister at all, only poor judgment, reflected glow, and a wetland indifferent to explanations. At night, indifference can wear a very convincing face. Your host says that people who know the water distrust unexpected invitations. A light does not always mark a landing. A voice does not always need rescue. A shortcut does not always remain open. The rules sound practical, yet they carry the polished rhythm of warnings repeated across many evenings. You place the empty cup on a crate. Its metal base touches wood with a soft click, briefly louder than the distant frogs. Your eyes feel dry from staring beyond the lamp, and your shoulders begin to loosen beneath weariness. The stories have not made the night safer, but they have given shape to what frightened you. A formless darkness is difficult to rest beside. A darkness containing fireflies, glowing fungus, calling animals, drifting mist, and human imagination is still strange, yet more understandable. You can almost feel the camp gathering these explanations around itself, like patched cloth placed over cracks. A little air still enters, a little unease remains. Still, the space feels more habitable. The host draws a blanket around his shoulders and rests against the wall. His eyes close, though the posture suggests he can wake quickly if needed. The lamp is now only a faint amber curve within glass. Through the doorway, foxfire continues its dim green watch upon the fallen wood. One last floating glimmer appears among the trees. You study it patiently this time. It brightens, dims, and rises slightly above the grasses. Another glow answers nearby. Fireflies, you decide. Their signals drift quietly over the water, indifferent to every fearful meaning a tired visitor might give them. The strange cry does not return. Your breathing slows, and the carved hand beside the bunk no longer resembles a warning. It seems almost like a greeting from another wakeful soul who once needed something amusing to study in the dark. You lie back carefully, letting the damp blankets settle over your legs. Beyond the netting, faint living lights blink among the reeds. No spirit approaches the landing. No wandering flame leads you away. Only the wetland remains, bright in small secret places, telling stories because human minds cannot resist listening. A thin line of mist begins gathering across the water, pale enough to resemble breath upon glass. It lies low between the cypress trunks, drifting through the reeds in soft bands. The lantern glow touches only its nearest folds, turning them creamy gold. While everything farther out dissolves into grey and black, you are almost asleep when something knocks beneath the landing. The sound is light, then repeated, followed by a scraping drift along the outer boards. Your host lifts his head and listens, but does not rise. A wooden paddle, left propped beside the pirogue, has slipped loose and now floats against the platform edge. It will not vanish immediately. The cord tied through its handle has caught upon a post. You offer to fetch it. The task seems harmless enough. You take the smaller hand lantern, step onto the wet landing, and crouch carefully near the tied boat. The air outside feels cooler against your face, scented with mud, rainwater, and crushed leaves. The paddle handle lies just beyond reach, nudged by each little pulse of current. You extend the hooked pole toward it. The pole touches wood, slides away, then taps the paddle farther from the landing. The cord loosens from the post. With surprising ease, the paddle drifts into a narrow opening beside the reeds, no farther than a few boat lengths away. Your host reaches for his boots. You shake your head gently. You can manage this. That confidence is brief and very expensive. You lower yourself into the pirogue, place the lantern near your knees, and use the pole to ease away from the platform. The boat slips smoothly through water polished by mist. Your paddle is visible ahead, its pale blade glinting whenever the lantern catches it. You keep your eyes upon it, concentrating on the small, ridiculous chase. The loose paddle turns around a clump of floating plants. You push once more and glide toward it. The boat touches the plants, separating them with a whisper. Your hand reaches down, grips the wet shaft, and lifts it across your lap. There, a simple rescue completed without drama. Then you look up. The camp lantern is gone. You blink, turning slowly. The narrow opening through which you entered has widened into several openings, each framed by reeds and swollen cypress roots. Mist rests between every trunk. Water mirrors darkness above, removing any clear division between root and reflection. You hold your lantern higher, expecting the shelter to appear instantly. Only bark appears, then more water. A warmth rises beneath your damp shirt, unrelated to the weather. You tell yourself that the camp is only moments away. Hidden behind one stand of vegetation, you need only reverse your course. The thought would be more convincing if you had noticed your course while following the drifting paddle. You set the recovered paddle into the water and pull gently. The boat responds with almost no sound, gliding into what appears to be the broadest passage. The lantern throws moving bars of light across tree trunks, each one briefly familiar, then unhelpfully strange. A hanging curtain of moss brushes your hat as you pass beneath a limb, trailing cool droplets against your neck. You stop and listen. Somewhere behind the insects and dripping leaves, you expect a voice, a creaking board, or the soft contact of water against camp posts. Nothing separates itself from the surrounding wetland. The shelter, so obvious while you occupied it, has become one small dark shape among countless dark shapes. In flooded country, direction depends upon knowledge more delicate than choosing the widest visible opening. Experienced travellers may read current, wind, tree forms, marked trunks, vegetation, stars when visible, and remembered turns. During darkness or rising mist, those guides become uncertain. A channel that appears open can tighten into grass. A short turn can lead behind vegetation that conceals every helpful light. You paddle back toward the clump of floating plants. At least, you believe it is the same clump. Its round leaves shine wetly in the lantern glow, gathered beside a leaning root. Yet nearby sits another patch nearly identical, and another beyond that. Plants float, reflections change, mist makes distance dishonest. The boat bumps softly into a cypress knee. You push away quickly, and the lantern swings, casting large, leaping shadows around you. Your movement disturbs a resting bird, which bursts from a branch with a frantic thrashing of wings. You gasp and duck, nearly dropping the paddle you ventured out to recover. The bird disappears. Your breath does not calm so easily. You decide to call toward the camp. Your voice sounds oddly flat upon the water, swallowed by trunks and hanging growth. You call once, then wait. No answer arrives. Perhaps you face the wrong direction. Perhaps the camp stands very near, with your voice drifting elsewhere through wet corridors. A distant splash answers instead. You sit perfectly still, feeling the pirogue rock beneath your weight. The lantern flame makes a faint ticking sound inside its glass, fragile and personal in the vast darkness. A mosquito finds your cheek, and for once, You barely care. Direction has become far more important than itching. There is a practical rule for becoming uncertain on water. Stop making the mistake larger. The problem is that calm wisdom requires a mind willing to admit it is lost. Your mind keeps insisting that one more turn will solve everything. The camp must be behind the next screen of reeds. The landing must be just beyond the next bent trunk. You take one more turn. The passage narrows almost immediately. Tall grasses scrape along both sides of the boat, producing a dry whisper above the water. The bow begins pushing into floating debris. A sweet, decaying smell rises from the trapped plants, thickened by mud and stillness. Ahead, the channel appears closed entirely, a dark wall of reeds trembling in your lantern light. You have entered a dead end. Reversing a pirogue in confined water demands patience you do not currently possess. You plant the paddle too forcefully, catch it among roots, and pull with rising embarrassment. The blade frees itself suddenly, splashing your sleeve and turning the boat sideways. Water slides coldly against your wrist, while reeds rake the shoulder of your shirt. A low croak sounds nearby. You laugh once, weakly, because the frog seems to be offering commentary. At last the bow points outward. You ease from the grass pocket, carefully this time, returning to the open stretch of black water. Unfortunately, open water does not mean familiar water. The mist has thickened, blurring the nearest trees and hiding anything beyond a short lantern radius. Travellers in Louisiana wetlands sometimes marked routes by cutting blazes into trees, tying cloth, fixing bottles or other visible objects to limbs, or relying upon known bends and natural features. Such methods mattered because ordinary landmarks can vanish during high water, darkness, storms, or seasonal growth. A route that feels obvious at midday may become a maze under one small lamp. You search each illuminated trunk for a mark. One holds only moss, another carries a ragged strip of bark. The third bears two shallow cuts arranged almost vertically. Your heart lifts. You angle toward it, studying the pale scars as the boat approaches. They are not deliberate signs. They are damage left by a branch or an animal, meaning nothing useful to you at all. The tree offers no apology. A tiny bell jingles somewhere in the darkness. You turn so sharply that the lantern rattles. The sound comes once more, delicate and metallic, then stops. For a startled moment, it resembles a signal placed upon some hidden landing. You paddle toward it slowly, desperate for any human trace. The lantern discovers a thin branch hanging above the water. From it dangles a small cluster of empty freshwater snail shells, caught together in a knot of grass and vine. A breeze moves them gently, and they chime against one another with a sound absurdly like a miniature bell. You stare at them, half relieved and half offended. Strung shells have appeared in decorations and small handmade objects in many waterside communities, while naturally tangled shells can create equally curious little noises. Tonight, this accidental instrument has offered neither direction nor comfort. It has merely demonstrated that the swamp can produce charming sounds at extremely inconvenient moments. The current carries you sideways while you study it. When you look down, a cluster of drifting leaves passes the hull, all moving steadily in one direction. You remember that current might guide you toward the wider water near the shelter, provided you understand which flow served which passage. That final condition proves annoying. Still, choosing a measured clue seems wiser than paddling according to panic. You let the pirogue drift for several feet. Water threads past a wide trunk toward an opening where mist moves in soft ribbons. You follow carefully, dipping the paddle with controlled strokes. The passage broadens slightly. Somewhere ahead, frogs call from a low bank, somewhere behind. The shell bell gives one faint chime, then becomes part of the darkness. A pale gleam appears near a branch. For a hopeful second, you think it is lantern glass. Then it blinks and rises, revealing itself as an insect floating through the mist. A second gleam follows. Tiny living lamps. Lovely when safely observed. feel almost insulting when you're searching for boards, rope, and a human voice. You call again. This time an answer reaches you. It is faint. No more than 2 short notes produced by something harder than a voice striking wood. You wait, holding the paddle across your knees. The signal sounds once more. Tap, tap, pause, tap. Your host is using a pole against the landing boards, making a sharp rhythm able to travel across water without being mistaken for an animal cry. Relief weakens your arms. You turn toward the tapping, then stop yourself from rushing. Sound across open water can deceive direction, especially among trees where echoes scatter and soften. You listen through a full sequence, choose the strongest line, and paddle slowly toward it. The tapping grows clearer. A thick tree blocks the path. You steer around its broad base and discover a second lane leading left, while the sound seems to come from the right. You choose right, entering water smoother than the grassy pocket. A dim yellow spot appears between trunks, disappears as the boat moves, then shows itself again. The camp lantern. It is the smallest beautiful thing you have ever seen. You paddle toward it with care bordering upon devotion. The landing slowly takes shape through mist, first as a horizontal shadow, then as wet planks edged with reflected gold. Your host stands upon it, holding the long pole. He has tied a strip of cloth around the pole head, making the moving signal easier to see when he lifts it. You reach the platform without speaking. He catches the bow rope and steadies the pirogue while you rise on legs less dependable than you remembered. Your hand finds the slippery post, gripping it tightly until both feet stand upon boards. The paddle rests across the boat, rescued at last. Its importance has diminished considerably. Your host studies your face, then glances at the short distance between the landing and the reeds where you vanished. He does not laugh. This restraint is merciful. The camp had been near enough that a loud voice might have reached it under better conditions, yet hidden enough that you moved steadily away while convinced you were returning. Researchers still argue over how often stories of people lost in swamp country reflect genuine navigational danger, embellished warning tales, or both woven together through retelling. No embellishment feels necessary now. Darkness, mist, vegetation, and a misplaced confidence have already created more excitement than you required. Your shoes leave wet marks upon the landing as you step inside. The room smells of lamp oil, drying rope, herbs, and damp cloth. All wonderfully familiar. A tin cup waits upon a crate. A folded blanket lies near the bunk. Even the crooked boards underfoot appear less like crude construction and more like a personal welcome. You place the hand lantern down carefully. Its handle has left a deep red line across your palm. Your fingers tremble slightly from gripping the paddle. Though the little journey required no great physical effort, confusion has its own exhaustion. It tightens the chest, sharpens every sound, and stretches a few minutes into a landscape far wider than distance deserves. Your host secures the recovered paddle high upon 2 hooks, safely beyond wandering current. Then he taps the landing once with the pole, a quiet final note, as though closing the matter. Outside, mist continues drifting through the water lanes. The trees remain identical in shadow. The passages still open and close according to angle, light, and uncertain judgment. You sit close to the lamp, warming your hands around its gentle heat without touching the glass. The lantern does not brighten the entire swamp. It never could. It simply defines one place where direction no longer needs to be guessed. That seems sufficient. The water beyond the boards keeps its many paths hidden, soft and silent under the mist. You do not resent it. A maze is not cruel because you entered it without understanding. You listen to drops falling from the roof edge, to the pirogue rubbing safely against its rope, and to the steady breathing of another person nearby. Your feet remain planted firmly upon the floor. Tonight, the narrow circle of light feels wonderfully large. A pale softness begins to gather along the eastern waterline, so gradual that you notice it first upon the nearest cypress trunk. The bark, hidden in blackness for hours, slowly regains its ridges and reddish-grey colour Mist hangs low across the channels, no longer mysterious, only cool and delicate, lifting from water touched by the first suggestion of morning. You sit beside the doorway with a blanket around your shoulders. Your body feels borrowed from an older, less cheerful person. Damp cloth rests heavily against your skin. Your fingers carry tiny stings from rope and net. Your neck itches beneath your collar. One knee complains whenever you shift position, apparently resentful of every narrow boat, cramped bunk, and sudden movement demanded by wetland life. Yet you are still here. The oil lamp burns faintly, defeated now by the growing light outside. Its amber circle, so important during darkness, shrinks against the widening silver view. Your host lowers the wick until the flame disappears, leaving only a curl of soot-scented smoke inside the glass. The simple act feels ceremonial, as though the camp has formally handed you back to daylight. A bird gives one crisp call from high among the trees. Another answers from a hidden limb, then another from farther across the water. Soon the wetland begins opening its many voices in gentler tones. Warblers chatter within leaves. A heron croaks roughly from a shallow bank. Small wings rustle through hanging moss, shaking bright beads of water toward the surface below. The great dark world becomes detailed again. Where your imagination had filled the water with unseen movement, you now see floating leaves, broken sticks, scattered pollen, and small rings formed by feeding fish. The landing boards shine beneath a layer of rainwater, their grain showing clearly. A spiderweb stretches beside one shutter, jewelled with droplets, its maker resting quietly in the centre, like an artisan admiring finished work. Even the shelter looks different. In morning light, the patched roof is less threatening than resourceful. The leaning posts appear weathered rather than treacherous. The tools upon the wall resemble ordinary equipment again, not strange shapes waiting to trouble a sleepless visitor. Daylight does not improve the camp, it simply removes the dramatic assistance provided by shadow. Your host lifts the shutter fully, allowing cool air through the little room. For the first time, the breeze touches you without delivering a swarm of biting insects. You close your eyes briefly and feel it move across your cheeks. Damp hair and smoke-scented shirt. The air smells of fresh water, soaked bark, crushed greenery, and the faint clean sweetness of flowers hidden somewhere among the trees. A pot receives water collected during the rain. Your host examines it carefully, then places it above a renewed flame. The stove catches with a low crackle, sending a thin line of blue smoke into the waking air. Soon coffee begins darkening the pot, and its rich bitterness enters the shelter with such authority that your tired mind becomes almost hopeful. Morning coffee requires no elegance here. It is poured into the chipped cup, cloudy and strong, warmed by fire fed from carefully sheltered wood. You hold it close beneath your chin, breathing the steam until your face warms. The first mouthful carries bitterness, smoke, and a hint of grounds. It is imperfect, comforting, and exactly right. Your host steps onto the landing and studies the waterline against the posts. Small marks upon the timber show where the rising water reached during the storm. The level has already begun to settle, leaving bits of grass, leaf clusters, and a narrow streak of mud clinging above the current surface. You crouch beside him and see how closely the water approached the floor. Only a little distance separates inconvenience from danger. He inspects the landing, testing each plank with the heel of his boot. One board has loosened at its end, lifted slightly by the wet force underneath. He brings a hammer and several nails from the tool wall, then kneels to secure it. Each strike sounds clear across the morning water, steady and practical, startling a small bird from nearby reeds. You hold the board firm while he works. The timber feels cold and rough beneath your palm, swollen from rain and stained by years of weather. A few nails, a firm hand, and knowledge of where weakness begins can keep the landing useful. The repair is plain, yet there is dignity in watching a person answer damage without ceremony. Along one side of the water lane, cypress knees rise from the shallows like an audience gathered quietly in daylight. Dew brightens their pointed tops. Higher overhead, grey strands of Spanish moss stir beneath the mild breeze. A pair of white egrets passes between the trees, their wings broad and glowing against the green shade, moving with an effortless grace no tired human can reasonably imitate. Louisiana swamps and bayous provide habitat for extraordinary numbers of birds, fish, reptiles, mammals, insects, and plants. Wetlands also help store floodwater, trap sediment, support fisheries, and protect surrounding landscapes in ways that are easy to overlook from dry roads and comfortable rooms. What feels hostile during a lonely night remains, in daylight, a deeply productive living system. Productive does not mean gentle. Your host opens the covered container holding the fish gathered during the dark hours. One will become breakfast, while the others will be prepared for carrying or preserving. He works with practiced economy, keeping waste controlled and tools clean. The pan soon warms above the stove, and a modest portion of fish begins cooking beside a small cornmeal cake pressed flat against iron. The smell reaches you with immediate force. Hunger, hidden beneath fatigue, rises enthusiastically. You eat from the tin plate while watching sun shafts pierce the mist, each beam turning drifting moisture into pale gold. The fish tastes cleaner in morning air, crisp at the edges and soft within. The cornmeal cake is plain, browned, and wonderfully steadying. A narrow canoe passes far across the open water, paddled by a single figure whose hat appears briefly between tree trunks. The traveller raises one hand in greeting, receives the same gesture from your host, and glides onward without turning aside. Human presence feels strangely precious here, even when it lasts only seconds and crosses at a respectful distance. Water routes once connected families or workers, settlements, markets, and hunting or fishing grounds across landscapes where ordinary travel could be slow or impossible. A pirogue was not simply a charming wooden boat, it functioned as a path, a workbench, a carrier of food, a means of visiting, and sometimes the only reliable connection between a camp and the wider world. Near the landing, a bright flash catches your eye. A blue bottle cap, dulled by scratches, has been nailed to the outer corner of one post. You ask its purpose, expecting an elaborate answer about direction or water height. Your host says it reflects morning light neatly, which helps him find the landing when glare lies across the surface, a tiny practical ornament, shining like a jewel. The answer pleases you. People enduring difficult places need not remove every touch of brightness from their lives. An object may serve a task and still make someone smile. A cup can be chipped, yet cherished. A carved mark can pass an idle minute. A flashing scrap of blue metal can guide a wet boat home, while also making Grey Post look surprisingly proud. The sun rises higher, warming the roof until drops begin sliding from its edge with quicker rhythm. Steam lifts from damp boards. Your hung shirt grows lighter, though it remains far from dry. Small lizards appear along a sunlit rail, absorbing warmth with motionless contentment. One opens its throat in a tiny display, then races into a crack when your shadow reaches it. The camp resumes its daytime order. Nets are folded, hooks are examined, wet cord is spread across the platform rail. The pirogue is emptied of leaves and rainwater with a shallow scoop. You take up the scoop yourself, tossing silver arcs over the side while the boat rocks beneath your hand. The task is simple, almost soothing. Each scoop leaves the bottom a little clearer. Mud streaks remain along the boards, along with a lost scale catching sunlight like a small coin. You wipe the seat with a cloth, noticing how carefully your movements have changed. You no longer lean carelessly toward the water, or place a foot without checking where it lands. Learning sometimes enters through discomfort. Historical researchers still debate whether popular descriptions of swamp camps overstate danger in favour of thrilling tales, or understate the constant strain carried by those who worked in these environments daily. A visitor remembers a frightening sound, a sudden storm, or a confusing water route. A worker also remembers wet boots, repaired netting, spoiled stores, sore joints, and the endless patience needed to make a living. You suspect both kinds of truth can exist together. A night here need not become disaster in order to challenge you completely. No roof has flown away, no animal has dragged you beneath the surface, no fever has announced itself upon your skin. Still, you stand tired, bitten, smoke-scented, mud-marked, and newly respectful of every ordinary action that keeps a person safe in wet country. Your host begins loading the pirogue with balanced care. A basket sits low near the middle, followed by covered provisions, the repaired net, and a small bundle wrapped against moisture. You place your blanket aboard, then take one last glance around the shelter. Its walls remain rough, its floor uneven, its roof patched in several places. It does not need your admiration, it has earned it anyway. You lower yourself into the boat, settling upon the wooden seat with your hands resting lightly against either side. Your host loosens the lines and takes up the paddle. The platform drifts away from your shoulder, then the shelter itself begins to recede among cypress trunks, partly hidden by leaves and trailing moss. The boat moves through morning water so quietly that the departure feels less like leaving than being gently released. Sunlight spreads in broken pieces across the surface. Insects skim low among floating plants. A turtle slips from a log, making a tidy splash, and you greet the sound with only a small lift of your eyebrows. You have improved slightly. The channel opens into broader water, where breeze travels more freely and carries the fresh scent of reeds. Your shoulders relax under the growing warmth. With every measured paddle stroke, the camp becomes smaller behind the trees until roof, platform, and lanternless doorway blend into the shaded wetland that supported them. You understand now why a single night could overwhelm an unprepared visitor. The challenge is not one monster waiting beside the bed, or one storm gathering overhead. It is the unending closeness of heat, water, insects, uncertainty, labour, and attention. Each demand is manageable alone. Together, they slowly claim every careless part of you. The wetland glides beside the pirogue, neither welcoming nor refusing your understanding. Cypress trunks rise calmly from their reflections. A dragonfly crosses the bow, shining green and bronze for one perfect second. Somewhere deep among the branches, an unseen bird pours out a gentle descending song, clear enough to make the morning seem larger. Your hands loosen in your lap, the boat rocks softly, and your breathing begins to follow its rhythm. There is no need to search the dark surface now, no need to judge every rustle or protect each small flame. Daylight rests on the water like thin silk, trembling whenever the paddle enters, mending itself whenever the blade lifts free. Trees drift past at an easy pace. Their moss hangs quietly, pale and soft. The warmth upon your face grows kinder, drying the edges of your sleeves and easing the chill held in your fingers. You carry the smell of smoke, rain, fish, and damp wood upon your clothing. But even those scents are fading into the wide green freshness around you. The camp is no longer visible. It remains somewhere among roots and water, holding its tools, its sleeping nets, its crooked boards, and its small hard wisdom. You do not need to see it again for the lesson to remain gentle and clear. A place may be beautiful without being easy. A person may pass through difficulty without needing to conquer it. The paddle dips, whispers, and rises. You watch widening circles move away across the bright surface, each one growing thinner, softer, quieter. A breeze lifts along the channel and touches your eyelids. Your body settles against the boat, heavy with honest tiredness, held by the steady movement of water beneath wood. Around you, morning continues without hurry. Birds call from shaded branches, then fall silent. Leaves stir, then rest. Light slips through the trees in slow patches, warming the mist until it becomes almost invisible. The wetland keeps breathing in its patient way, and your own breath becomes slower within it. There is nothing left to prove. You let your eyes close for a moment, trusting the measured paddle, the clear channel, and the mild golden air. The rocking boat becomes a cradle of cedar scent and water sound. The difficult night loosens its grip, not disappearing, only becoming softer at the edges, like a story settling into sleep. A final drop falls from a passing leaf and touches the water with a small silver note. Then there is only the glide, the warmth, and the calm end of script. Sleep well.